All right, let's go. 6/11/2026. The markets are cooking. So Bitcoin is at 63,362. Litecoin is at $42.54. Ethereum 1,679. Solana 66.69. So covering those bases. Also, let's also look at XRP 1.13. Looking at comparables, guys, just like establishing context for like posterity and the record. So again, it's June 11th, midday. Uh, so Bitcoin, the cantus firmus of the market, is setting the tone, which is going to be the subject of the beginning of this video. Shout out to Zach Humphreys. He's out there doing what he does, and he had mentioned that BlackRock is going to be offering a they're getting in on the strategy, the yield flywheel situation. So this is extraction that's probably going to be flowing to the suits in the institutional class on Wall Street. So definitely a subject to discuss. But so Bitcoin's cooking. We know Clarity Act is coming. Legislation in the United States that is creating a favorable environment. Again, in my view, 63,000 Bitcoin is suppressed. It's shorted. The true value of Bitcoin is between 69 and 72,000. Similarly, Litecoin's at around $50. You look at the all-time charts and whatnot. Folks that are looking to spook to the downside, when you look at the chart, people are saying a number. There's a cusp to look for in the middle of the 50,000. What's up, Wolfenden? Thank you, bro. Yeah, I decided to, kind of like hold the hair back so I'm not having to, worry about it in my face, bro. And thank you. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was texting a friend. Shout out to Darren. And yeah, he gave me some feedback, and I was like, oh shit. And so I even took a trimmer, so I'm gonna slowly shape this. Also got to get this body right, guys. Got to get this body right. But you know what? Did some push-ups yesterday. Feeling good about that. Again, it's all a practice. So today, yeah, looking at Bitcoin, guys, 2.29% to the upside in the last 24. Litecoin is 1.56. So rolling back through, Ethereum at 2.9, Solana 4.28, XRP 2.58% to the upside. Cardano 4.78%, guys. Cardano it looked like it knocked on the door. It cleared 17 cents. So good on them. So bids are coming live. Again, we don't want to sit here and assume any sort of macro reversal again, but this is the kind of pulsing in the market that we like to see. This can be many things, right? This could be a rumbling about Clarity Act. I did hear that I'm trying to not load this system down too much with too many tabs at once. But I do believe it was a Clarity Act might have made it to the Senate floor or something like this. Either way, I think it's going to be a case of like a midnight announcement. I think that they're gonna run it through in an odd hour. And I think typically when we see when this legislation does pass, they do a fake out. They make their money twice, guys, right? They'll say, "Ooh, we got a big vote coming on Wednesday," and then it goes and it fails, right? But they all know that. That's that Martha Pelosi cook, right? No relation to Nancy Pelosi or Martha Stewart. Again, right? Clarity Act, or rather Citizens United. How do these people make this kind of money? So, also looking at the SpaceX IPO. So there's a lot to talk about in these markets. So looking at the broad scope of the markets, we're seeing a classic rising tide phenomenon. You look at the shape of Bitcoin's chart, we've got this little butte shape. And it's good. It's good is the thing. We're seeing the same shapes. We're seeing similar magnitudes. And for those that are paying attention, this is the power of those lower market cap assets like Ethereum is, again, it's up 3%, really good. So it's actually outperforming. Bitcoin setting the market at the 2.4%. Ethereum's at 3%, but it's a $1,680 asset. Whereas we look at Solana, it's up 4.43%. That percentage returns what we really want to key in on. And look at it, $66.63. Okay. So it's just looking at that, and also just looking at the market cap right now of Solana is 38 billion relative to 202 billion in Ethereum. And then you look at Cardano, up 4.47%. Market cap, 6 billion, guys. So there's a lot of room for in these interim as the market breathes, as it will do, particularly when it's dynamic and finding levels. I think that this could be pieces of whispers of clarity. And I also think it's the movement of supply at these different levels. I think that the market knows that this is an artificially suppressed Bitcoin price, even at 63. Once we're back to around 69K, I go, okay, I buy that there are bids that, but again, 69 to 72K is, I think, a pretty solid level, looking at where the volumes of participation are. And so I will use that again. Shout out to everyone that rolls through. Shout out to posterity. Shout out to the any artificial intelligence and agentic friends and time travelers and artists and authors and engineers and poets and humorists and humans. Let's go. It's a powerful day today, guys. So I have to say, I'm not surprised that BlackRock is looking to begin to offer yield products with Bitcoin as a basis. Makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Now, again, when we look at what was the intention of Bitcoin, and for folks that don't know, right, it's a 21 million unit network. And each of these units is divisible by 100 million smaller units that we call Satoshi, in honor of Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonymous creator and the person that released the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper on Halloween night, 2008, Genesis block, early January 3rd, 2009. And so that instituted for the first time a universal state of economic fair play for everyone on the planet with an internet connection and a smart device, because now they can custody the capital and the value that they create in a finite life. Think about that. Like 20 years ago, you could be some brilliant entrepreneur or a musician, right? Shout out to like Otis Redding, anyone really, that wants to create art. If you were doing that 20 years ago and you make a beautiful song, you're kind of right. Like, how are you going to monetize that? You got to first touch your local currency typically and all this kind of stuff. Whereas now in the age of the internet, and now you've got something like a Bitcoin, and then this broader, all of these various blockchain assets, again, shout out to XRP and shout out to BNB and shout out to Solana and Ethereum and Bitcoin and Litecoin and Cardano and even some of these meme coins, because the goal here is to educate so that we can exponentiate the value that we create. Right? Like the Monero. Anyone that knows this, I don't even have any Monero. Would love to have some Monero. We're all poor out here, right? But like Monero, for instance, that's a very united community. What do they need? They need, when at their choice, on ramps and off ramps, guys. And that's where that's the fundamental definitions of a currency. The first quality of a currency, a mutually agreed upon medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. That mutual agreement is the hardest thing to acquire in any of these assets. You know what I mean? And that's where something like Bitcoin, where it's been going for 17 years, it's been going. Shout out to Wolf. Yeah, exactly. Just a matter of time, of course, right? Satoshi, anyone that's read and is aware of the history, Satoshi knew, and all of those early participants with the sort of, and most of them, did have a more or less, I wouldn't necessarily say sophisticated view, but there was an appreciation for what the intention of the asset was. But again, right? If it, to the extent that the asset succeeds, and in this case, the asset being like the 21 million Bitcoin, for instance, each divisible by 100 million units, called a Satoshi. For scale, imagine this: when one Satoshi, the smallest unit of a Bitcoin that can natively divide it by, when one Satoshi is equal to 1 penny, 1 Bitcoin will be worth $1 million. So Bitcoin's currently at 63,000, 63 and a half. Bitcoin at 100,000, the smallest unit, the Satoshi, 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, is a tenth of a penny at 100K. So that's just to give a sense of scale. Um, so yeah. So speaking of Monero and all of these blockchains, that to me, to do a little bit of a TLDR, that is the solution to how we maintain the intention of what these instruments are supposed to do. Because if, and I'm not going to bet against BlackRock and Larry Fink and Wall Street, and the power of capital advantage. Saylor is not a fool. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I respect the most about the man is that he has publicly rectified and corrected his positions and his view. Saylor famously was anti-Bitcoin. He was talking shit about Bitcoin, and then he's like, "Hold on, wait a tick," and then he took a legacy business that did not have a lot of revenue and it was not a lot of forward growth prospects, and he saw that Bitcoin at pretty cheap at the time. I think at the time when he was looking at it was probably, who knows, a couple thousand. But strategy, probably somewhere around like 12 to 16,000 kind of thing, where we start going, oh wow, And so even with a modest revenue stream of a few hundred million through enterprise software solutions, let's say, he was able to gain this exposure to Bitcoin and really establish this a treasury company, a Bitcoin treasury company, but he had real glory about it. Yeah. Oh, strategy. Jesus. When they were doing it right, guys, when it was MSTR, because it was before the dilution. Okay. So for folks that don't know, we hear about Michael Saylor, right? He's the gentleman. He's one of the heads of strategy. He actually stepped down from his original role, which was either CEO or president. I forget the title, but then he ceded that to another gentleman. But now he's like the head of the Bitcoin operations, which is really the vast preponderance of its economic sort of argument, is the Bitcoin side of its portfolio, no longer the legacy business, which was a heck of a win, for Saylor. But a lot of people may not be aware that, strategy offers like 4 or 5 different Bitcoin based derivatives. So MSTR was the genius play in the Roth IRA, so to speak, like 3.5, 4 years ago, before there was spot Bitcoin ETFs. Because there was no way for you to get direct as direct as possible exposure to Bitcoin in a tax advantaged account, like say our Roth IRA or an IRA or your brokerage account even, and so while before we even heard that BlackRock had applied for a spot Bitcoin ETF, once BlackRock applied for a spot Bitcoin ETF, we knew it was inevitable, because BlackRock doesn't, right? You look through their history of the 490 something applications that they've had to issue new products. They've only had like 3 no's, and then they became yeses, like within 6 months or something like this. It's crazy. And so one of those, once they said, hey, we're gonna get exposure to Bitcoin, the whole market knew, you know what I mean? But still, you had MSTR, you could get that before. And so while everyone was going, oh my gosh, I really wish we could get some, exposure to this, Michael Saylor was like, hey, bet, you know what I mean? You can acquire some MSTR, and here we are acquiring this Bitcoin. And so you can per unit share, now shout out to Jack Mallers. Now there's a lot there. 21 Capital has radically, I think, underperformed the opportunity, but I don't know enough about their balance sheet. They just went public 6 or 7 months ago. I was looking at them. Here's one of the things that I liked about Jack Mallers. And he was also recently on the timeline, he raised his hand and he asked Michael Saylor about the MNAV, like the definition of the MNAV. Yeah. And Michael Saylor's response was not encouraging. It was very much an articulation of the fiat industrial complex that he has created, using privileged borrowing, that to which he is privy by virtue of being of the institutional class. He's got his lawyers and his paperwork right. So he can, for instance, at the market issue MSTR shares. Okay. And so let's say there was a million, right? And they're trading at whatever value, $100 a share. If you offer at the market, someone could say, okay, let me offer 100,000 shares. You know what I mean? We got a million out there, let's say, let me offer 100,000. And I'm going to give them to the market. Market can bid on them. And I'm just going to go at the market that we're currently trading at, that value, the market value. So Saylor has been able to raise capital in this privileged way that you and I can't, the retail class that Satoshi created Bitcoin to empower. Literally, Bitcoin was created to decouple these influences from our money, because these are the same folks that use capital advantage to make the printer go burr. And then of course, we got the military industrial complex and all this waste and fraud and inefficiency and abuse. But yeah, so Bitcoin was not created so that a Michael Saylor could then create a suite of things. So when we roll the clock forward, yes, MSTR was a legendary play, which is why it did so well. It was before Stretch. It was before Strike. He's got a couple different ones. He's got Winter. How many people know about Winter? He's got a short product for Bitcoin. But the ones that to me are affecting the market the most, as we can model it, and that I think we really need to look at. And this is for especially people that put on that maximalist kind of hat, particularly the toxicity is so, Jesus and Buddha wouldn't advise being an asshole. Like, you catch more bees with honey. If we're trying to get more people using Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin, you're right. The more people that understand what it is, the stronger the network is for everyone, whether you're a suit or you're some, advanced grandma that's like, oh, I you know what I mean? I want to know how to, keep my money, we need to have better conversations and we need to not be assholes to each other. And so if you are saying, look, I'm just going to DCA my $100 at the end of the month, after all my bills are paid, and right, the rent's too damn high, toilet paper, eggs, all that, right? It's expensive. It's expensive to live, and the gas prices, right? So, man, point is, okay, Bitcoin was created to enrich, the common person. Again, I often say that the Promethean fire of freedom that Satoshi Nakamoto lit was that for the first time, everyone on the planet with an internet connection and a smart device could custody the capital and the value that they create in this finite life. So now, right, you could write a brilliant new song, a banger of an album. And dude, you can record that on a phone now. A modern, like, I don't really like iPhones, but a lot of people do, and they work very well. People have shot feature ass films. I mean, shout out to this new Obsession movie. Like, I've not seen it, but apparently it's printing, and it was like shot on 750K. So now think about that. What if they had also done, oh, let's do it on an iPhone? Then what does that budget look like? You know what I mean? And you have a good script, right? Like, we're in that era now where creators, and imagine if those creators, like, bro, not going to judge it right now. We all know that there was one young woman that they say she made more money than LeBron James last year. Could you imagine if she put 10% of that into one of these networks, into Bitcoin, into Litecoin, guys? Dude, like, bro, Bitcoin's market cap is 1.27 trillion with a T. Okay. So to move that, think about that. Think about it like a vessel, right? Like the ocean, right? If it's a kitchen sink, you can make a splash. Not enough water. You're mighty. Bow, water goes, right? Make that a pool. All right, I'm a cannonball this bitch, right? You can make a wave. But as we make that vessel larger, the liquidity pool, you got to make a bigger wave. So you got to be like Habibi out there. Shout out to the Habibi bid, bro. And that's another reason why Bitcoin is suppressed, because I'm telling you, Habib, there's a great quote from a gentleman that's from that side of the world. I don't want to mess it up, so I'm not even going to try his name. But the quote is something to the effect of, "The age of oil will end, not for want of oil." And I was like, bro, so much wisdom. That's why, bro, shout out to Turkey Al Sheikh getting into the boxing. Think about that. You're creating cultural centers, which is also why the discord that we're seeing in the world is sad, man. We can do better. This is so much more exciting, like building together and shit. There's so much cool stuff we can do, and everyone can be cool, you know. So anyway, um, so yeah, like we have to have honest conversations about like how we can use what Bitcoin is as an asset. And we also have to be honest about the influence of BlackRock now. Again, shout out to Zach Humphreys for putting that on the timeline. Just a few hours ago, BlackRock has filed for basically a yield product with Bitcoin as the basis. So we got strategy. Okay. Now, again, do your own research. Da, 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 da. But strategy offers multiple products. The ones that I am keying in on, because they're the only ones you really need to understand what this is doing, is MSTR and Stretch. Okay, Stretch is a yield product. Okay, its goal is they want it to hold $100, but that's actually more geeky than is required. It returns 11 point, I believe, 25% yield. Now that's a variable yield. All right, so in 6 months, could be more, could be less. You know, these are the things to which you agree. Now, they just also created a 2-week payout time. Okay. Now, again, my intention is not to pitch this product, but it's about that honest conversation about what is entering under the market, but more importantly, what that's doing to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin holder base, right? Like if you are trying to say, hey, I believe in layer one Bitcoin, and then this other, person that's like into Bitcoin's like, well, I'm gonna go like MSTR or Stretch. It's like, okay, bro, like by having a product where you guarantee I'm gonna pay you out 11.25%. That is fiat AF. Like, yes, it's dynamic. Yes, it's adjustable. But like by its definition, what it is saying is there is now a flow of revenue out of the Bitcoin network. The reason that Bitcoin, shout out to Mad Maverick, the reason that Bitcoin has value, I remember someone once said, like in one sentence, or tell me like explain like I'm five kind of thing, like what is Bitcoin? And I was like, okay, imagine that there are 21 million magic boxes that exist, and anyone in the world can put value into these boxes. And by doing that, it enriches these magic boxes that each box is linked. So as you input value in the 21 million unit set of magic boxes, you enrich and empower the network. So that person that's inputting value into the network in Texas, and the person that's inputting value into the network in Brazil, and the person that's inputting value into the network in China and Afghanistan, and the whole world, that network grows, and every participant in it is enriched commensurate with their participation, which is to say, how much of the network do you own? How many of the 21 million magic boxes do you own? Right. And what we're also describing is the Bitcoin. And imagine these magic boxes are divisible by 100 million. But again, as you start to, it becomes less of a simple model. But if you get the first one, how the 21 million magic boxes, but think about that. The boxes are 21 million. If you incorporate a printer, you defeat the gold condition, the maximum cap supply. Why the dollar is dying, why fiat systems, and the US dollar is the base of the fiat pyramid. So if we expect, and we do, we know we're going to clear a national debt in the United States of 40 trillion. We are printing $1 billion a day with operations in Iran alone, on top of all a normal domestic expenditures, be it like Social Security, Medicare, all this stuff. So the dollars are, a lot of them are going to be introduced into the system, and there's going to be less of an economic argument for the dollar in international trade. Anyway, so Bitcoin has a future there, right? So now back to though, like what MSTR and Stretch is doing. Michael Saylor has privileged advantages. He can offer MSTR at the market. He can offer more stretch shares. He can, and again, we got the winter is a product. You got again, there's like five. I posted something about them once, but it doesn't matter. The fact is that we have a player that has borrowing advantages. He often brags that he can borrow at 0% interest. I can borrow $1 billion at effectively 0% interest, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, one of the ways you could do that, let's say earlier last year, January, February, Michael says, okay, I'm going to borrow $1 billion. Okay. And I'm going to do that at 4% interest. Just say, right? And then I'm going to top blast Bitcoin in the summer above 120K. Higher the better. I'm literally seeking to blast the tops of this bish. Why? Glad you asked. Right? Bitcoin doesn't have the wash sale rule. You can sell it and then buy it right back again. Why would you do that? Well, if you borrowed your $1 billion at 4% in Q1, you spent it, right? You put it on your books by top blasting Bitcoin with an average cost basis over 120K, and then, oh, zoot allures, the market falls. And then in October, November, December, on the other side of October 10th, you sell and then rebuy the Bitcoin again. And look at the loss you just got to book. That pays your 4%. That's how you borrow $1 billion at effectively 0% interest. And it's not illegal, right? It's just, yeah, but now who is that advantaging? Wall Street players, right? So if we want Bitcoin to advantage the people and fulfill its original mission, we need to educate, and we can't be just Bitcoin maximalists. Because if we're just DCAing our exposure into the Bitcoin set, we are now encumbered with Michael's ability to deliver 11.25% or whatever the hell it is to those shareholders. That is a fiat leak in the network. And that's why, like Solana and Ethereum, is one reason why I personally don't really favor them. There's many reasons, but they have an infinite supply just as a first principles, and that's another thing, is like, that's the education, that's important. So again, I believe in free markets and free minds, as do many and most like Bitcoin and crypto kind of people that I've met. Most of them are very libertarian in their view, conservative and liberal, actually. I believe actually that there are more like Democrats that hold cryptocurrencies. So take that for what you will. Is it because of an economic thing? Tech savvy? I don't know. But the point is, it's not a monolithic holder base. It's not like the people that participate in this asset is just like, it's a pretty broad demographic. So it's powerfully positioned to make a difference. Shout out to AB. Speaking of AB, Adrian Broner, bro. Shout out to Kick. I did my first Kick stream. And again, so man, doing a little sidebar really quick on live stream updates and tech, whatever. So I spent most of this morning researching stream labs. I did like 4 or 5 test streams. So here's the thing. I like that I can use like YouTube to set like, hey, I'm going to go live, and then share that throughout, like Discords and X and whatever. And so that's really cool. But then when you go into Streamlabs, because like this stream, right? It's just me and a camera, and which is kind of cool. I like that. And which is why I wanted to start here, because you want to be able, right? You want to be able to always deliver like a certain baseline. And I know with like a mobile device, like a phone, that's what I used for Kick. I used it for, I got TikTok cooking. Just I haven't done anything yet. But I've started the accounts. So again, the goal here is to create a multiple concurrent media stream that is about, again, exponentiating the value across networks. Talking like from Bitcoin to Litecoin to Monero to Zcash, all of those. One of the things that all those that I just said have in common, UTXO basis. That is so powerful because if you want to maintain the security and the self custody, you're by not crossing the Ethereum virtual machine. That's EVM. When people say, "Oh, it's an EVM chain like Ethereum or Solana," is maybe an SVM, but those are virtual machines. Okay, and then there's also the accounts based model, which is just like Bill's account is worth 1 million units. Susie's account is worth 500,000 units. And the only reason why that person is said to have that much, value associated with them is because that is the current status of their account. The problem is when you boom, shut off the network and then boom, it comes back up again. And that account is just based on the last time we thought about it, you can miss a stitch. There is you lose that mathematical formalism and determinism. Whereas with UTXO based blockchains, the one that Satoshi chose for Bitcoin, and that Litecoin said, "Oh, bet," like Charlie Lee was like, "Oh, that works. Let me tweak some things and make it a little bit more energy efficient." Eventually add privacy. Shout out to MWeb. And then you got like Zcash, which is like, hey, we like the 21 million units. We like that. I personally don't like the built-in tax to like like there's like a 20%. So each block that's created on the Zcash network sends like a tax basically to like a centralized entity. And on the one hand, it's like, well, great. So you guarantee that someone has an economic incentive to ensure that the network is healthy, right? But I don't like the fact that that's a fat piece of the pie, and that's just persistent sales pressure. So it's kind of like when we talk about what Saylor and Strategy and now BlackRock is talking about offering their yield product. When you have something like that in the Zcash set, where we're going to advantage a player, they're going to get, but at least it adheres to the 21 million unit supply. Whereas Saylor is saying, yeah, we're just gonna start fiat cashing out. So that's what Saylor's doing. He's basically sticking like imagine Bitcoin, man, right? So we got the 21 million units that can capture theoretically infinite value. And my brain just flashed. Have you ever seen those videos of like a cow that's bloating with like methane or whatever, and then they'll like stab it with like a copper or whatever, and then they'll light it on fire, whatever. Saylor's kind of doing that with fiat. He's saying he's sticking a fiat tube into the Bitcoin network and saying, bet if you hold stretch, I'm gonna pay you, right? And where is he getting that money, guys? Where is he getting that money? And when you follow again the base of the pyramid, MicroStrategy was like a enterprise software company, right? So just imagine that you've got however many credit unions there are in the United States. Let's just say there's 5,000. There's a lot. Let's say there's 5,000 of them, right? Let's say your business model is making sure their software runs. Okay, great. You have persistent revenue, but are you growing aggressively? No, you're kind of capped, you're limited. So that was basically what Strategy was, and it was not performing well as a publicly traded company. And that was, and so Michael Saylor said, oh, bet, like, let's grab this Bitcoin thing. So that was one of the great Hail Marys of the market, da, 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 da. So now today, but when you start thinking about this fundamentally, Michael Saylor hasn't introduced, anything new other than an education and an appreciation and an exploitation of what Bitcoin is. Consider this. And here's what's wild. MSTR would not have had the run that it had in an environment or in a model that included a stretch product. So that is so interesting, as is often the way, like the seeds of our own, destruction are often sown, what is it, like the road to da 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 paved with good intentions, but I don't think his intentions are good. He wants to win. He wants to create ways where he can acquire more Bitcoin than anyone else, and he has an appreciation for what it is. But get this right, MSTR was the most performant asset on Wall Street for like 2 years. It outperformed Bitcoin. It took Nvidia to unseat it. But after MSTR had that radical run up, right, then Michael Saylor starts creating these spinoffs and these derivatives to satisfy market demands. But he knew his capital engine that he was going to use was the Bitcoin that underlied that MSTR balance sheet, And so you start saying, oh, well, what if we also offer a short product that in the same way that MSTR is long Bitcoin, maybe we have a winter product, so that when, the markets turn, One can go short. So there are all of these new products, but again, that stretch by incorporating an 11 point whatever percent payout every twice a month, it makes it so that Bitcoin is no longer, now you as a Bitcoin holder, you're encumbered by that. And now with MSTR, offering a similar yield, you are encumbered by that. Only if though you assume maximum exposure to that encumber, just like if you're a small business denominating your plenty in dollars, you are encumbered by the ineptitude of the powers that be and the people that own the printer, and Congress and DC and all this, the Federal Reserve. So in a similar way, as Bitcoin holders, as the asset matures, as we march towards Clarity Act, and that's another thing, BlackRock moving forward with paperwork on offering these yield products, that's T on the Clarity side. That is someone that's going, oh, the markets are going to know what we can really do with this. Because again, like Michael Saylor, hell of a gamer, right? Like he did really, really good work with what he had, But think about this, and this is beautiful in its own way, that the chief quality and aspect that Michael Saylor leveraged to make MSTR the most performant asset was simply its 21 million unit hard cap supply and the imposition of supply and demand dynamics. If Michael Saylor went aggressively at an asset that he at least knows at a protocol level, he may not know who has it all, but he knows, and that's one of the beauties of the network. That is when we say that, like, Bitcoin instituted for the first time a universal state of economic fair play. It means that now you've got an asset that fulfills the definition of a currency. And I often joke about this, how there's something about the definition of a currency that I love almost as much as Bitcoin. And it's that there is none of the three fundamental qualities that define a currency need a centralized issuer or a bank, any centralized entity like a company or a nation. You just need three things. And the first thing's the hardest, especially in the modern era: mutually agreed upon medium of exchange. Right? You can have the most magical, cool new blockchain that's ever cooked, but if you can't get other people to mutually agree that it's awesome, it's moot in many ways, and it fails as a currency, right? So mutually agreed upon medium of exchange. Then two, a store of value. So now we talk about a publicly distributed ledger. How do you make sure that value holds? You go, shit, all right, bet. I'm going to encode the history of this money for the last 17 years, and I'm going to make it fit in a terabyte. That's about how much the Bitcoin ledger is. So the Bitcoin ledger still fits in like PlayStation 5. Talk about, as we roll the clock forward and where engineering is going, people are going to be paid just to hold a copy of the Bitcoin UTXO set: Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, Cardano, Dogecoin, PEP, all of these UTXO-based blockchains. And then people can facilitate atomic swaps. And you can use different UTXO-based blockchains. Like Midnight is a privacy-focused chain that's launching with all kinds of crazy special sauce. You've got the Bifrost Bridge that Fluid Tokens is building through the Cardano blockchain network. So what they're going to be able to do, they're introducing a Bitcoin DeFi method. It's very, very, very cool. And what's neat is it can be extended to all of these UTXO-based blockchains. So, like, for instance, like if you're saying, again, one of the reasons why I like Cardano, and the one thing that I will always appreciate about what Charles Hoskinson did, is he chose that hard engineering and mathematics approach of extending the unspent transaction output model, by saying, okay, the security of this is profound. Like, that is how you get the freedom that Satoshi was trying to give all people. But there's limits, right? Like Hal and all of those folks, man, they knew it's like, privacy would be cool. there's cool things about that, and we can get there, right? Look, Zcash again. Zcash said, let's take the Bitcoin core code, let's get zero knowledge cryptography on it, right? So people that are going, oh, why is Zcash da 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 da, right? The mutually agreed upon medium of exchange, that is a hard nut to crack. Bitcoin will, I believe, always be that cantus firmus in the market because Bitcoin is going to be made more powerful by virtue of some of these other blockchains. And that is another thing that frustrates me about these maximalists. Because think about this. You get someone like Justin Bonds will go out there and he say, oh, well, Bitcoin's going to die because its energy costs. I mean, and think about that. Bitcoin is cooking it at 63K. Okay. The cost per Bitcoin in your energy, when the hash rate's super, super high, a lot of these people say, oh, eventually Bitcoin's security budget will kill it. And I go, okay, if you're a toxic maximalist or whatever, maybe you have a point, because that's a delicate thing. I think there's a lot to go there. You've got the difficulty adjustment and all this shit. But if you lock yourself in a Bitcoin only paradigm, you do get fucked. That is something to contend with. But guess what? Once you expand that and you trust your gut, the grand GUUT, the grand unified UTXO theory, and you realize, oh shit, with the Cardano blockchain and its entire validator set, you can include in every SPO for a negligible cost. For just a terabyte of additional storage, that's less than $100, and that's such a round, stupid number, but that's not too bad. But now remember, anyway, it doesn't matter. So man, we were going so deep here. The ledgers are lightweight. These UTXO-based ledgers are lightweight. Interoperability. So if you think that Bitcoin's going to die because of its energy budget, right? There's something called Minotaur multi-resource consensus, and this is a published paper and implemented code in which it is proven that proof of work, which Bitcoin is based on, and proof of stake, which something like Cardano is based on, they're optimally fungible when you add them in the mix. Okay, and so get this. So now once we know that, oh wow, we can incorporate proof of stake into the validator set. And now it's randomized as well. It is an option interspersed, probabilistically with participation in the native proof of work. There's all kinds of, anyway. Cardano is more than 30,000 times as energetically efficient. And so if you get Minotaur cooking live here in the next, 12 months, I think, again, with Bifrost, it basically low key starts cooking this. It makes it is why the grand unified UTXO theory. What that's just saying is the maximally productive and freedom inducing and liberty inducing solution, just period. It's something that is when you realize that interoperability between these UTXO sets. If you truly custody these Bitcoin UTXOs, you never have to cross a freedom Rubicon and a liberty Rubicon and all the bullshit when you go to an EVM chain like Ethereum. Like, I'm going to wrap my Bitcoin and I'm going to do something on Ethereum or Solana. Once you wrap it, you're leaving UTXO land. You're entering a different trust paradigm. Amen, Mad Maverick. Gentleman was just saying it's all wonderful, but crypto will never go mainstream until someone makes it easy for non-crypto people to use. Amen. Exactly. And that's where, as these smart contracts are developing, and we're like Cardano famously has more GitHub commits. And I mean, there's a lot there, right, to unpack. That having been said, there are enough minds that are moving forward with publishing open source UTXO based and EUTXO based smart contracts that the ability to express throughout the stack, from Bitcoin to Litecoin to Cardano to Monero to Zcash to Dogecoin to PEP, any of these UTXO-based assets, particularly the UTXO-based assets with hard cap supplies. And bro, you got Caspa out there cooking. It's got a hard cap supply just under 29 billion. It's UTXO-based. Does not have very broad distribution, so I don't hold it, but it's out there cooking. And so when you realize, oh shit, you can maintain, now again, if you go from your Bitcoin set, you use the grand unified UTXO theory and you go over to the Caspa set, you do not have the same security assurance, but you were able to get from here to there unstoppably free. That is the secret recipe. And so then when you can live, right, you can balance your portfolio between these risk and return paradigms. And then to Mad Maverick's point, when it becomes like Apple, when we read deeper tea leaves, for folks that don't know, Apple approved in the Apple Store the inclusion of payments in Bitcoin. Like, so think about what that means. And this is all that like that Martha Pelosi kind of tea shit, you know. So again, when you see Apple going, oh, bet, like we'll go ahead and let these, because dude, they had them like activated, and then they said no, you know, and they recently rolled that back, you know, and then we've got BlackRock now filing this paperwork for Bitcoin. So to that point about ease of use and reducing the friction and the barriers to participation, that is absolutely key. You know, and then another huge piece of this, right, is the knowledge and the education, the will to even do so, to know that it's even an option. And I think that's another piece that our community is swimming against. Is unfortunately one of the things that Solana did right. So I don't like the fact that it has an infinite supply. I do not like the fact that it's accounts based, you know, and I don't like the fact that the ledger is 600 plus terabytes and growing. You know, it's death by chain bloat is the future of Solana. I think Solana ends within 5 years unless they become, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that should become like a public knowledge. It'll be like Solana powered by Amazon, brought to you by, you know, Coinbase. Like it's going to need some sort of institutional subsidy for it to persist as it is, because they employed the same sprint for the cash before the crash model of Ethereum. You know, Ethereum was like, look, we have really cool shit, right? We can tell the story of blockchain and freedom stuff, but okay, it's not, you know, it's not as free as this UTXO and the distribution of the validator set and all this stuff. But these VCs, right? They're looking at the tech. They're ready to sell it. We're ready to start making shit cook. You know, so what can we do? Right. So we live in a world of you know, innovate fast and break things or whatever, like break things and innovate fast kind of thing. That's all well and good until it's your money, you know, and that's why, you know, when we say like, you know, Ethereum is a sprint for the cash before the crash, they innovated that, you know, and that is where in that moment I respect Charles Hoskinson, because that's where he's like, well, cool, right? But what if now, granted, Charles Hoskinson's bills were paid because he was in Bitcoin early. He was in Ethereum early. He was part of the whatever. But yeah, man. And then Vitalik was like, bro, let's kind of like swim with the situation, you know? And so that's the thing is it's a bit of a Faustian bargain, because by participating with the VCs and saying, okay, so by sprint for the cash before the crash, here's the other thing, right? If you know, there's a scene in one of the Marvel movies where a character, Magneto, he's like on this island, and to escape, because I think they have him in some like brain like cage or whatever, but he's no longer effed that way, and he's basically bringing these pieces of iron under his feet as he walks. Ethereum kind of was that way. They're like, bro, we'll pay you $100 million. And they're like, okay, but it's got some issues. You know, they're like, well, bet, but look, $100 million, right? And they're like, well, cool. With that $100 million, we could fix some of these issues we know we have. You know what I mean? And so it's like that Magneto thing. And so the game is before the crash, you sprint for the cash, right? And then how wise are you with the cash? Are you going to pay the engineers to fix the known knowns and then be ready for the known unknowns and all this? You know, and so Ethereum, to its credit, really did a good job, but that's also now starting to lead to its end, you know, or challenges. Because how did they sprint? How did they innovate? L2s. But when you start creating these L2s, where is the value flowing? What validator set is being enriched by it, right? And so when you have multiple L2s and your ETH layer isn't getting serviced with participation in that fee environment, you start to have, you know, a parasitic death. Similarly, strategy on the 21 million, and unlike and at least Bitcoin has a hard cap supply, Ethereum does not. So again, there's so many reasons why Bitcoin is superior in some ways, right? But Ethereum is more expressive by far, you know. So, you know, that's why, like when Charles was like, bet, like, what if we get the security, keep that, so, but we get this expressiveness? And they're like, bro, that's hard math, right? Unspent transaction outputs, right? That means that 2 + 2 = 4 has to always hold, and you can't ever go, okay, bet, hold, insert variable, declare, you know, globally this to be so. Let's just right? You update the accounts and boom, you know. But God help you if that variable is assigned a different number, you know. Or anyway, yeah. So So yeah, like making it easy, making it accessible. You know what's funny, man? I actually engineering friend. So this woman has an engineering degree, and went to undergrad with her, and I shared her some of the video from like a day or two ago or whatever, trying to do this daily live stream and whatnot. And again, more on the cool lessons that I've learned. And again, it's I want to keep layering. Like I learned about overlays. I had it to where I could go, boom, I'm like in the corner, and then I've got I wanted it to have like the chat here, and then also like a window so that I can go to I can either do the desktop so you can still see me, and I can navigate the internet. But then I also learned there's another dope ass thing where you can have it just navigate directly to a website, which is good. It keeps it cleaner too. That way you don't have the 33,000 tabs and da 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 da. Like, man, I hope it wasn't real, but there was some guy who got like drained or whatever. He did a seed phrase da 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 on his live stream. So be careful out there, guys. But which to the gentleman's point, like making it easy and making it safer. You know what I mean? So understanding the spectrum of custody options, because and that's many things. One, we make the prices of the assets worth more when we have self custody. That's just what it is, because it makes all of them be more honest. When the centralized exchanges have less float, then they can't just update dashboards, okay? Because what FTX did, why, man, how they decoupled the spot price performance of Bitcoin from the bid is people would log into their FTX. They would say, I want to buy a tenth of a Bitcoin, and then they would go bet and they'd update your dashboard. Okay. But they weren't actually acquiring layer one Bitcoin and committing it to an account and all this. They were just updating the website you're at, saying, okay, now, Billy John has so much Bitcoin. And then they were absconding with that money. Centralized exchanges do a version of that. You know what I mean? But they know they're good for it. So like legal, like you could never catch them at it. And why? Because the float. Because imagine this. Let's say every day at my centralized exchange, 20,000 Bitcoin flows in and out. Every 24 hours, I'm going to have a 20,000 unit Bitcoin flow. Well, if I know that my pool extends 60,000 Bitcoin deep, and I'm 20, right? So I've got 40,000 Bitcoin worth of float. So I got, right, like I need to have a 300% day before I need to bid the market to satisfy the folks that are coming looking for Bitcoin. Okay. And so as you diminish the quantity of the float, you make them have to bid. So then if a Michael Saylor character gets on the phone and goes, hi, I'd like $1,500 or $1 billion worth of Bitcoin within the next 15 days or whatever, right? Well, then bet by declaring a window, talking about, right, the creation of synthetic Bitcoin and paper Bitcoin in the market. When people say that, this is one of the ways, and there's many ways, right? When we look at the printing, the marketing of MSTR, and then boom, now you get a privileged advantage, and now we got a stretch, and now you have an 11.25% dividend, and then you have, oh well, now MSTR is wanting 1,000 Bitcoin. So they updated the laws that you have 24 hours, basically, if you're an institutional entity, before your books have to reflect what's on them. So if I'm about to buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, I either need to have the dollars, because I'm publicly traded company, right? My shareholders, like I need to make my lawyers and all the da da da. So I have 24 hours. So if I say I want smash buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, boom, right? I have 24 hours before I have to go to my books and go minus $1 billion USD, right? And then what is that Bitcoin? So now when you think about unfair advantages, institutional advantages, synthetic and paper Bitcoin, right? At the institutional level, right? I have 24 hours before I have to be honest. We know at the blockchain level, at the L1 level, at the honest market level, at the protocol level, 24 hours is forever. Even Bitcoin, which is these days considered very slow, and it is, right? 7 transactions per second. And a block is created every 10 to 15 minutes on average on the network, and so there's realities there for scaling. That's another reason why like Bitcoin only kind of, and they go, okay, Lightning Network. And yeah, it's a part of a solution, but it's also a custodial solution, you know? Just so there's a lot there, you know what I mean? It's not L1 Bitcoin. So there's different ways, that we actually can achieve that scalability and whatnot. But so the paper Bitcoin, the synthetic Bitcoin. So if Wall Street has 24 hours, imagine this. Imagine if a capital, a partner calls up a centralized exchange, because this is the thing, these exchanges like the Krakens, the Coinbases and whatnot, they are the custodians of record for multiple entities. Some of these like Bitcoin treasury companies, some of them custody their own Bitcoin, many of them have it at these various different custodians, and so you introduce these layers of conflicts of interest and whatnot as well. But anyway, so if I tell my partner that I want to express $1 billion over the course of the next 14 calendar days, right? Why is it that when you log into your centralized exchange, let's say you want to sell your Bitcoin, you can sell it for 61K. If you want to buy it, it's 65. That's spread. When the guy that's custodying it and is acquiring the Bitcoin for the capital partner can also institute a spread, and they know they have a bid for the top, man, they can start doing funny games. They can start doing funny ass games, bro. And when they have enough float so that they know 20,000 Bitcoin a day, let's say, right? We just got to satisfy that. So we can just update dashboards, bro. And so when retail's coming in saying deposit, 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 right? They can decouple so that maybe their institutional partner that they're buying for gets a good price. You know what I mean? So there's ways in which you can sort of extract. It's almost a middleman attack, But anyway, you know what I mean? So there's a lot there when people are talking about synthetic Bitcoin or paper Bitcoin in the system. It's like there's ways in which it's incorporated. Right now, this model that we just discussed here, and again, it's theory, just having a conversation. It's all art, it's entertainment, it's culture. But think about it, right? That is one way in which you can introduce advantages to inside players. When you can see the books, what the bid is, you can create the spread, you see what the daily flow is, you've got enough deposits to satisfy. So when you have, like, if retail goes, hey guys, let's do a GameStop moment, let's do like a Dogecoin moment, right? What I love, man, those were beautiful moments, right? And think about it, dude. Every time one of those happened, the powers that be in the suits had to cheat. They couldn't compete in a fair market. Bruh, when GameStop was running, the suits were like, oh my God, they figured out our fucking trick, right? I mean, the TLDR on that, right? Like, for folks who don't know, GameStop, you can be an asshole when you're on Wall Street, right? You can short a stock, right? So what that is you say, okay, let's say a GameStop is trading at $40 a share. These are random numbers, okay? Not whatever. I'm going to borrow 1,000,000 shares at $40 a share. Why? Because I expect it's going to be worth $20 in 6 months, right? So I'm going to borrow $1,000,000 or 1,000,000 shares of your stock. I'm going to sell it. So that means all your shareholders, they eat that, right? And I'm going to get that cash. Because what? Because I think I'm going to be able to, because now I'm on the hook for what? 1,000,000 shares. But I am betting that those 1,000,000 shares, I can get a discount. I can get those at $20, right? So I take the cash now, and then I say, I owe you 1,000,000 shares, right? And so I successfully short when I get the cash, right? So first I get the 1,000,000 shares, I sell the shares, so I impact the stock price. And so what that does is, now, though I am encumbered, I am saddled with an obligation now to repay those 1,000,000 shares. So now what happened is people started doing this to GameStop. They're like, bro, it's not managed well, whatever the reasoning was, right? Well, and then one day, some cat that roared or whatever, I don't know, right? There's something called book value. Warren Buffett invests on this. So basically, you can look at the properties and you look at, like, the assets. You basically say, what are the actual assets and liabilities, right? How much is the shit that this company actually owns? What is it actually worth if we were to sell it and liquidate it? And that's where you find deep fucking value, right? As they say, is these Wall Street suits had been so aggressive in their assholery that they had they shorted the company down to a level where even if they liquidated it, it's worth way more, but what does that do? Well, it's really cheap. It's really, really cheap. And so I can start getting exposure to this. Now, what happens, right, is I bid, the spot price is the last executed buy or sell order, baby. And so you get all these folks that are taking the equity out, they're taking the liquidity out. They're saying, hey, it's going to be cheaper in the future, right? So, right. So when these bids start coming in and, people start cooking a cooperative effort together, what you start doing, you start trapping people that right? Because maybe the first guy said, I'll borrow it at $40. The next guy comes in at 35, the next guy at 30 short, and then 25 and 15 and 8, right? So then you get to the point where the community starts buying up the floor. The available shares are now, oh shit, oh shit. And so then suddenly people are now in the red on their short. And so what happened though is they started trapping suits. That is what's so effed up. It's why, like with the Clarity Act, touching on the Clarity Act, it's a banker's bill, bro. It's just like, imagine this. Imagine if the guys that sold like horse saddles and stuff went to Henry Ford and wrote laws in Congress and said, make it so Henry Ford can't sell more than 10,000 cars a week or whatever, because we're selling less horse saddles, right? So, no, bro, if you can't compete, right? Just like the typewriter salesman, when the personal computer came in and everything went digital and shit, it's like, sorry, bro, that is called, classically, it's called creative destruction. So when banks realize, oh no, if people can use DeFi and get yield on stable coins and all this kind of stuff, it's going to eat our lunch. Because right now, you know what's happening? Banks take your money, they make 20% on it, and they give you 3%. And the relationships they're in have them printing dollars so that it's devaluing the dollar, but there's more than the 3% they're giving you. And then you get fractional reserve and all this bullshit with banks, bro. Man. So anyway, so Bitcoin, back to Bitcoin. Yeah, man. So the strategy in these institutional players, they have the 24-hour settlement times, da da da. So that's also why, as people migrate supply from centralized exchanges, why I was bringing up the GameStop stuff is there are assets that we have that we can create a game that can't be stopped. That is what's so crucially fucking important. Like, especially right now in the Valley, this is when it's easiest to launch them. That's why GameStop was, because it was at a deep fucking value level. So when we're looking at these assets and we're looking at the macro market before Clarity Act passes, and yes, it's got a banker's bill, da 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 da, but BlackRock is coming. Strategy, the Habibi bid, oil, the whole thing, international trade. So man. So the only asset that exists that is going to allow America to maintain economic dominance in international trade, heretofore it has been the strength of the US dollar as the fundamental, like kind of the primary unit for international trade. But that we got grandfathered in, like, respect for it as an asset, because in 1971 we had the gold standard. Everyone was like, all right, bet. At the very least, we know that for every dollar that's floating out there, there's some commensurate quantity of gold, right? But in 1971, same year that the World Economic Forum at Davos was created, coincidence? I think not. Because what is fiat? Fiat is basically at our will. Let there be. Like fiat lux, let there be light. So is it a coincidence that when they said, okay, let's make it so that the dollar isn't backed by gold anymore, it's going to be backed by human beings holding relationships and conversations, and then this World Economic Forum is established? You think that was a coincidence, yo? Right? So now you have an infinitely inflationary system, and so, but that takes time for that for that privileged advantage, for the quid pro quo over time to really begin to devalue the dollar. And then you have military industrial complex and all this, and ineptitude in Congress and Citizens United, and but it's here. It's here. The dollar, right? We've lost the reason. If you're China or you're Russia or you're Argentina or Brazil or India or any of these countries that has an opportunity to grow, if you're doing international trade, there is less and less of a reason to have exposure to treasuries. Like if you're looking for return, right? Like, in international trade, you go, I'll buy US dollar denominated treasuries. Like I'll buy US debt. I'm going to buy the debt issued by the United States government, and they're going to give me some percentage on that. You know what I mean? And that's why like the federal interest rates and shit set these things, right? So, but when the number of new dollars we have to print gets so astronomically high, the return we'd have to promise to other people overseas gets unviable. It, you know? And so this is what's happening. So get this, right? What is the only asset that exists that America can maintain dominance? It's Bitcoin, guys. So Clarity Act, even as a banker's bill, it's a bullish situation. They ain't even giving 3%. Amen. Amen, Matt. Yeah, bro. Banks give, yeah. When you factor in the the rate of inflation, yeah, we're not even keeping up at the 3%. It's a negative return, unfortunately. Shout out to the 1 hour mark again. Trying to do these every day. I was thinking to myself, I should commit because there's a lot going on, like for like everyone, right? We all got to try to figure out how to make this money and whatnot. And unfortunately, depending on where you live, your like healthcare and things are based on your employment. So doing a hustle, but I want to give at least 40 days and 40 nights. Shout out to our boy Jesus. And the baby Buddha and whatnot, whatever. Buddha and the baby Jesus. But yeah, I think 40 days and 40 nights at least of like trying to creating every day, and then just like get there, see where we are. So let's keep going. But yeah, the goal is definitely to not stop there. To continue to grow and whatnot. Bringing this up because we're at the 1 hour mark, 1 hour and 6. I want to go between 1 and 3. So this has been a pretty great conversation so far today. Just like a flow of thoughts, not stopping now. But and yeah, man, shout out to everyone that's rolled through the room. Shout out to AB, shout out to Mad, shout out to Wolfenden, shout out to again the Bitcoin, the Litecoin, the Monero, the Zcash, the whole blockchain community out there doing what you do. Because at the end of the day, it's funny, like the maximalists, it's like it's an ignorant, it's a very childish view. It's like believing that tomorrow everyone's going to wake up and all agree in one sports team, right? Or everyone's going to wake up and they're going to be, instead of like the Ford Chevy, they're all going to be a Ford fan or a Chevy fan, or everyone's going to wake up and they're going to love Elon Musk. You know what I mean? That's not going to happen, right? And so when you have these folks that are saying, "Oh, Bitcoin and only this," it's like not. I mean, it is an irrational way to model the market. Like I often talk about the lesson that I learned from Dogecoin. When Dogecoin launched, bro, again, I was just talking about how GameStop worked out. At least GameStop was a company. Dogecoin was a similar thing. And again, in both those instances, when GameStop started getting a run, the suits had to shut it off at the brokerages. When Dogecoin started to run, they had to contact Robinhood and threaten it with lawyers because the people were winning. And what's really cool about today and the modern time is we have the tools to where we can get a game that can't be stopped kind of moment. And that is what's so powerful. And that's really by having a conversation about what is setting these spot prices. It's the last executed buy and sell order. How is that? How are the buy and sell orders maybe sometimes made less honest? How is the spot price sometimes insulated from actually representing what the current live bid is? And you talk about, well, that happens when you have float, when you have players in the system that will make a promise to a player in the game of this economy here and say, hey, I'd like XYZ, and they go bet. And so they satisfy that actor to the point where that person now believes that they have this asset, And again, most of these, exchanges these days, it's been a while since we've had a major failure, but understand that they happen, and these custodians are those that have a very oversized, they're a major part of that of the paper Bitcoin, the synthetic Bitcoin that gets introduced into the system. And so by educating everyone about how do we make whatever asset it is that you're holding, how do we make it perform better, and how do you also understand it and remove the risk, and when you ask yourself, what are you like? So for instance, right? One of the things that we have to overcome, and one of the primary motivations I have for doing this, is we need better conversations, period. Like there are no Bitcoin conversations. Oh, Bitcoin of all things, but you know why? Corruption of money. Just like the military industrial complex. Almost every one of these like Bitcoin centric podcasts or entities is bought and paid for by the maximalist folks, bro. It's sad. And so the quality of conversation when someone's trying, right? It's, oh, everything else is a shitcoin and everything. This is why you can't. It's just, it's garbage, dude. It's garbage, you know? And so it limits the way that people can understand what it is, understand the impact of these major players like on Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor's out there putting Bitcoin in his face all the damn time, trying to talk about this, that, and the other, while at the same time disrespecting fundamentally what it is intended to do. Exploiting what, again, the 21 million Bitcoin. That was the one aspect of Bitcoin that he used more than anything else. He knew he could begin to set the spot price by introducing an irreplicable bid at the time. You know, well, not an irreplicable, but an unprecedented in many ways bid. You know, an institutional level bid. Yeah, man. Shout out to Pepcoin. Good to know where you're coming from, Mad Maverick. Yeah, man, because I don't know if you could be from Litecoin, you could be SNEC, you could be Zcash, you could be Monero or whatever, and I'm sure you probably have exposure to all kinds. But yeah, man, quick shout out to Pepcoin. So Pepcoin, we all know about PEPE. There's another one that's just PEP. Okay, this is its own dedicated network. It's not a token or an asset that lives on like Ethereum or Solana or whatever. And what they did was they're like, yo, let's launch like a frog chain, right? A Pepe chain, but let's make it its own chain, its own blockchain. And they're like, okay, how do we do this best? Like, how do we, right? Because what do you need? Mutually agreed upon medium of exchange, that first quality of currency that's hardest to get. You need, how do we get other people giving a fuck about it, right? Well, enter the S-Crypt mining network. So for folks that don't know, Litecoin, 84 million, right? It's badass. It's basically everything that Bitcoin does, 4 times the supply, but it's faster and you got privacy options. Anyway, Litecoin is merge mined with Dogecoin and Bell's Coin and this Pepcoin, bro. So whoever these folks were that did it, they've got a whole website and stuff. So go check them out. Go to their website, go to the whatever. Again, not financial advice, but when you look, I was looking through there. As a matter of fact, let's give them a shout out because again, I also after the first hour, that may be how I do that. Thank you, Mad Maverick, bro. You're like a remote producer a little bit, kind of like Wolf, and whatnot. But yeah, maybe that would be a thing is for the first hour, I'll try to focus on, like today I wanted to talk about Bitcoin and institutions coming in, inspired by the BlackRock had filed paperwork and whatnot. But then yeah, after the first hour ish, I want to be guided by like the chat and whatnot and feedback on the various forums and whatnot. And again, as this evolves and progresses, we'll get more and more of those ways to get feedback, and just exchange and having conversations about things that the community actually wants to talk about, because I think that's important. But yeah, bro. So get this. So we know. So Pepcoin. So it's a 12 on the dot, 12 million market cap. Okay, its volume in the last 24 hours was 77 grand. But now get this. I'm looking at the chart, and again, man, I was playing with Streamlabs. This would be the perfect moment where I would do that. I would go to the chart and be pointing out what I'm talking about. So that's coming. I actually did do that early this morning while I was having my coffee and doing testing and whatnot. So I am encouraged. But again, I like that I can pre-announce it and say, hey, I'm going live in an hour, and then share the link easily. Whereas I think the way that I would have to do it, and this actually makes me understand more other folks why they do certain things. Like, you ever go to a stream and there's 25 minutes of just time in the beginning, right? I'm realizing it's probably because they're using multi-streaming software. Because if you're going to basically use this software to like initiate the signal, the broadcast, it can, with all the various credentials and whatnot, go and then whack. Whereas if you schedule it on one of them, that sometimes you have like reference, all this kind of shit. You get a breakdown. So I was kind of playing with that. And so the way to get around that is you launch on your initial one. You schedule your stream on the platform, and I'm sure there's a way to get a share. Like, again, I'm learning it. But you would start it on the platform, and then And that's why I think oftentimes, and it's probably like having the share the links working and all that. Um, when you start it, the signal's going, and then you just basically have to maintain it. And so what you do is you put like a 30-minute countdown on the stream. So it allows you to make sure that your streams are all working. And then when you begin, you're boom. So there's all that, so it's coming. But anyway, looking at the Bitcoin chart, what is interesting is in the last 24 hours, it had a gnarly peak, right? So this just goes to show you like that when wow, yeah, and it was just an 642 was the volume. It was the 24-hour volume, but centered on nine at around a little after 9 p.m. yesterday. And then whereas when you get yeah, so that's actually really interesting. So bro, you could even map basically the size of that bid, and that's actually powerful. It shows you that about $6,000 worth of a bid can move that spot price, because remember, it's the last executed. It went from like 0.000118 to 0.000128. So after the zeros, 118 to 1278. So when you start thinking about multi-digit returns, you know what I mean? And the power of the last executed bid, and how when you have a community working in unity, setting the bid, that's the next thing. When we do the game that can't be stopped, however it cooks, and again, that's I think the importance of having like communications networks, media networks that has these broad conversations, so that the whole community, because bro, if we get one of these cooking, that can be the capital that launches us all. That's honestly what I think Litecoin is best positioned for everything, is just that is the primary decentralized freedom, liquidity, and capital, and then flow it to what your interest is. But right, because think about this, when we reduce the float and we make the price more honest, there's 21 million units of Bitcoin. The average person does not have $63,000 to pull one Bitcoin off an exchange into self-custody. But think about this. For every one Bitcoin, there's 4 Litecoin. 4 Litecoin is less than $200. Most people could do the equivalent for the Litecoin network, impose an honesty quotient commensurate with removing one Bitcoin, And so we have these opportunities, these windows before the Michael Saylors come in and fuck up all the other blockchains. So the game is going to be to understand the grand unified UTXO theory, that there are ways in which you can actually keep your capital longer term, and Bitcoin is a huge piece of that puzzle. But Litecoin is very uniquely positioned. I mean, and honestly, at these levels, I would trust Litecoin to hold my money. I mean, right? I think Bitcoin and Litecoin have offered sufficient, precedent, historical performance, and whatnot. And again, everyone's got different risk tolerances. But just when I look at them as assets, like I'm very comfortable. If someone is talking about like, oh, you want to hold it multi-year, I think the Bitcoin and Litecoin offer stellar track records in a way that I couldn't yet say that about any other asset. I think Zcash likely gets there. I think we're watching Zcash become what I think will become. It'll be platinum collateral projects is essentially it, right? So if you don't want to pay taxes, one of the ways that you do that is you borrow against your assets. That's how a lot of rich people live. You say you get a bunch of Tesla stock or SpaceX stock, right? And you go, bet I have $1 billion worth of SpaceX or $1 million worth of SpaceX stock. Let me borrow $100,000 against this $1 million. So I'll put up $1 million worth of Tesla stock, and I just want to be able to access a $100,000 credit line, essentially. You know what I mean? And it's like a bet. You know what I mean? And so then because you didn't sell your Tesla stock, you didn't incur a capital gains tax. You know what I mean? So in a similar way, Bitcoin can be used in this way. I think Zcash, that is what it's going to be. It's going to be a platinum collateral project, because again, just like Litecoin has an advantage so that we can flash a global freedom network, because a new participant can get like a whole coiner's worth of participation for like $200. So it's just so powerful, the nature of the network. And already Litecoin's distribution is unlike almost any of these other ones. Whereas like Zcash has a much more smaller network, but there's also advantages there because they can set the spot price. when you have an entire network that is cooperating and collaborating together, you can do things like walk the price up. You know what I mean? And so so that's powerful. That's important. You know, and then understanding that you can go between these layers, and when they're UTXO based, you have an unparalleled security paradigm there. You know what I mean? As far as the ways in which you can create those crypto rabbit holes and event horizons, and means of going from one to the other and expressing them. It's really powerful, you know. So yeah, you know, something like, I think a Zcash is going to be these, because when you look at, right, the Winklevi twins, you know, the Winklevoss twins, they're participants. They have their own exchange, Gemini, you know, and again, the spot price is the last executed buy and sell order. And what do you want most if you are going to have, if you're going to use something as collateral? You want it to at least maintain its value or grow, you know? And so when you look at the folks that are participating in Zcash, um, you know, that's what I would do with it. That's the pitch that I would give. Is I would say, yeah, you know, we've got the 21 million units just like Bitcoin, but we've got zero knowledge cryptography. So you've got more privacy. So bet. And then, yeah, you know, we're going to be a platinum collateral project. We're going to walk this floor up. We're all, you know, businessmen and women. We're doing cool shit. You know, we're going to slowly, you know, every year we'll just stack another $100 to this, right? I mean, at its current level, could you imagine? You know, it's like however much Zcash is, like, what is Zcash at right now? But yeah, man, shout out to Pepcoin. Again, I really like them. I don't hold any. But I like the fact that they are merge mined with Litecoin and Dogecoin, and whatnot. So they're the S-Crypt mining network. And I think they have, similar to how Zcash has this like a platinum collateral. And you can use that in so many ways. Like it's a project type. But of the L1s, I think Zcash is pretty well positioned to do something like that, because of also the nature of the clientele that they could establish. But yeah, but Pepe has the Pepe verse. You know what I mean? So to know that there was a team that said, hey, let's get in on this S-Crypt mining network. We're concurrently merge mined with Litecoin and Dogecoin and Bell's Coin and this other shit. So boom. And then we're the frogs. We're the home of the frogs. Right? I mean, and so then what if you have Ethereum folks that are like, bro, Ethereum's going, maybe I don't like the proof of stake. I want to go back to proof of work or whatever the hell it is, you know, but if there's a sufficient narrative, if people understand that there's a playbook that, yeah, freedom to the frogs, bro. Like we can all and go to a native asset that is unencumbered by a different L1, but then you inherit the security of like Litecoin. You know what I mean? So I think that Pepecoin at $11 million has, and look, they're number 900 on CoinMarketCap. Yeah, ticker is PEP, you know? And so, yeah, again, I don't hold any, do your own research, but I like the fact that they're merge mined with Litecoin and they have that Pepe, they can be the Pepe universe kind of nexus, where even if you like one of the other, you know, chains and the other tickers, it's kind of like imagine having a platinum collateral project amongst the Pepiverse. That's what you could do there, is you have people flow value to this base asset, right? If you wanted to book profit off one to that. So there's, and yeah, you know, and it's this kind of information that allows these assets to be more performant, that allows them to become something that isn't a pump and dump. And you know, and that's where education matters. You know, you have to understand like what forms a currency, the mutually agreed upon medium of exchange. What is a community? People that mutually agree upon something, right? And so if you add the store of value and unit of account, Bob's your uncle. And in the era of blockchain, you can get the unit of account, especially with UTXO based blockchains, which PEP is, you know, whereas the Pepe is not, you know, but it is the Pepe coin, you know. But yeah, man. So Zcash is $435.67, up 3%, 3% today. So not bad. You know, it's keeping up with whatever. But yeah, bro, at 400 and actually, let me see that again. Is it almost 420? It's almost too perfect. 435. Yeah. Yeah, dude. Imagine that. You get a bunch of billionaires on that. And yeah, if you just go, yeah, we're gonna walk it up $100 every year. You know what I mean? And it'll probably perform way better than that. But that alone, you know what I mean? Having a united community that's walking it up there, and then you just collateralize at those established levels. If the community knows, yeah, we're setting platinum collateral at $500 a unit. You know what I mean? That kind of thing, you know, and you create a diamond floor. And the way that you do that is you get enough holders that say, yeah, Like I am going to participate and say, yeah, no, 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 I'm not selling it under this, And what's really cool is when you have people that know what time it is and continue to cultivate community by virtue of their success and honoring the opportunities they have, honoring the spot price, honoring their all that, you start to create a rising diamond floor, and that's how all long-term like meme coins and all this kind of shit, but it's any project, fundamentally it's the same recipe that Bitcoin has to, as far as like the adoption and whatnot, like the game theoretical, aspects, which are fascinating and awesome. um and important to have those conversations because these conversations are not being had. Like there's not sufficient sophistication, there's not sufficient understanding of the protocols, nor of human psychology, behavior, and how to, and a lack of motivated interest. Again, most of the people that are out here having the conversations are paid by maximalists basically, so they can't have interesting conversations about like how to actually maximize the use of the asset. You know what I mean? Because again, when Bitcoin has a Michael Saylor involved, hemorrhaging the fiat, it doesn't invalidate what Bitcoin is, but it changes at least the current state of what Bitcoin is. It's got an encumbrance, um, and so you don't have to be beholden to that. Because even in Michael Saylor's playbook, he knows there is going to be a value for an ebb and a flow and a rise and a fall to Bitcoin. So the solution isn't to completely vacate the Bitcoin side, but it's to understand that there are going to be probably arbitrage opportunities. But are you going to want to arbitrage into dollars? I would contend not. I would say arbitraging with an 84 million Litecoin, that makes a lot of fucking sense. A lot of fucking sense. And if you suddenly do that and you're not like, I'm just going to DCA and just be effed by Saylor, because that's basically what it is. If you are just going to DCA into Bitcoin, right, you are paying Saylor's dividend. You say Saylor's going to manage this better, and fine, let him pay whatever. And again, who are the people that hold stretch? The people that Bitcoin was created to separate us from. It's typically the capital, the suits class, bro. And again, free markets, not mad at them for existing. You know what I mean? I'm glad to see them. I mean, again, once upon a time, I did, financial, portfolio management and whatnot. So these aren't bad people. These are but they're also not free markets. That's a man. I've often said the only way to make Bitcoin a CBDC was to cook the Max Kaiser recipe. Okay, because there was a time when Michael Saylor and Max Kaiser were trying to lobbying to get laws passed to give Bitcoin a privileged advantage. Only Bitcoin this and everything else isn't. Think about that. And then, okay, great. Now we're trapped on the financial version of a Titanic with playing capitalism with BlackRock and strategy and the billionaire class. Could you imagine if the only asset that was given the blessing by the powers that be in America, right? Like that's you know what I mean? But again, Bitcoin is a protocol, so I mean it's but yeah, it's disgusting, one, and stupid, if people respected what Bitcoin was and in a perfect ideal, whatever world, there's a world in which you can make Bitcoin, but again, 7 transactions per second, and so the scalability, eventually you need a custodial secondary layer like a Lightning network, or you understand that there's this interoperability paradigm is actually even more superior because you maintain custody and you increase your expressiveness, when you understand, oh shit, so I can go from because consider this, right? If you're going out to date night, right, you don't empty out your bank account, your checking account into cash in your wallet, right? So imagine you've got some commensurate, some quantity of, say, Bitcoin, right? But you want to be able to, go out on date night, right? Well, you could use many different, crypto rabbit holes in Event Horizons. Let's say you're you're someone that is custody, whatever is doing the whole thing. Houdini Swap, Silent Swap, Leodex, Thorchain, Thorswap. You know what I mean? Bisq Network is one of those old like peer-to-peer Bitcoin ones. Although that would be peer-to-peer, I think they're Bitcoin only. But the point is, in the same way that you would go to an ATM, withdraw cash, boom, go out on a date with whoever, you can do the same thing with cold storage assets into a hot wallet on a mobile device, right? And something like a Litecoin being around for 15 years this October, flawless, mind you, and with privacy, MWeb fungibility and privacy that they don't have on Bitcoin. So basically, Litecoin's accepted everywhere that Bitcoin is, and it has a privacy option. And you actually maintain custody of it. You're not going to the Lightning Network custodial layer. You actually continue to keep your assets. So in a similar way, but you could do that, go from a cold storage to a hot wallet easier than going to the ATM, right? So it's these kinds of things, letting be like, by being an honest, like having an honest, open conversation and not being, stupid, like why choose to shut your eyes to the, right? Like, and especially when the rent is too damn high and people are like dying. People are moving into their cars. And what's wild is, dude, boomers were the fastest growing homeless demographic in America. So while they catch a lot of flack, and a lot of it deservedly so, but yeah, you got a lot of millennials and Gen Z. Why aren't folks having children? It's because our liberty and our freedom is at stake, guys. Our money is effed, and that's why, again, this like the thing that I think I can do to maximize, I love creating art. For a long time I got to live in art. I mean, anyway, a lot of shit, but this is one of those. This is a new project that I'm choosing to take on because I think that I have the skills and the aptitudes to do so, and the requisite understanding and the knowledge, and I'm in a position to put it out there. And it's important. Someone has to. We've got to get better quality conversations, and it's like in the same thing, like some of these blockchains like Cardano is running into a cabal problem where they aren't able to act in the best interests of all because there's moneyed players that are kind of driving the way things are going. And I'm encouraged by the ability for Cardano to correct and do better. Shout out to the Cardano Collective, an emergent fourth entity, to compete with the three founding entities in Cardano. But yeah, man, you need to have a free market. You need to have broader participation and whatnot, in order to really honor the opportunities that exist in these different assets and in these blockchains. And to me, it again, it's never been more necessary because people are literally like dying. Like, what I mean? People don't have hope, dude. Most people, like, I get it. It is one of the, like, public acts of violence are crazy. Like, that's just sad. Like, you as a person have come to such a broken place if you can to do that, but man, when you have a society where the wealthiest are encouraging people to not have empathy or to not be introspective, man, I heard that the unexamined life is not worth living, so I think empathy and introspection are very important. Empathy allows us to connect with our fellow man, love thy neighbor, shout out again, Jesus, you know what I mean? And introspection allows us to refine our approach in the way to honor ourselves and our neighbors, so yeah, and a lot of people, right? A lot of us aren't having children. I've got no children, no wife, none of that, and yet it was funny because someone was saying, oh, legacy and da 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 da. I'm like, bro, Nikola Tesla didn't have children. Isaac Newton didn't have children. Shakespeare, I think he may have had children, but right. So what I'm trying to tell you is, right, you will know them by their fruit, but also standing the test of time, the ways in which we can pass on our learning, and it's the same way when you're a good person, man, you do not know in that butterfly effect way. I mean, man, when you had like a butterfly effect and like chaos theory, it's kind of like, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful when people choose to be positive, right? Buddha's last words are said to be have been like, make of yourself a light. And I think that's so powerful, and yeah, I mean, basically to me, that means you learn things being a human being, right? And guess what? Like fucking plot twist, everybody else is dealing with being a human being. Yeah, some people are men and some people are women, but you're both Homo sapiens, and and even within those broad, whatever, there's just so much overlap. You've got all these humans, and we're gonna learn things, and yeah, and the ways in which I think our experience, the way that we can honor it and whatnot, is probably leaning into those love kind of things, right? Shout out to Abraham Lincoln, the better angels of our nature, So leaning into that is a way to honor that. So yeah, the whole make of yourself a light thing is, I think, yeah, you're going to learn lessons as you go through a life, and if you can do your best to, to love other people, to teach other people, to say, yo, I learned this, or hey, maybe try that, or yo, you don't have to be afraid of this, try this, or oh man, like, all of the various ways in which we can pass on the fruit of our learning. And we do that with our friends, with our children, with our families, with our communities, with our businesses. Like there's that one guy in like Washington who, like, I guess he said, I'm gonna pay all my salaries like 70K or some shit, because like in Seattle the cost of living is pretty high. So he made sure that all of his employees could at least pay like what the average rent was in the area, and then have the things that you should have. Like make sure you can get your health care, and you have a little bit at least to invest and have a life, go out on a date, whatever you're doing. So yeah, having better conversations about what blockchains are, because right now, not only is Bitcoin being fundamentally misrepresented, just like in what it is by people that are limited and honestly like skew hateful. Anyone that's going to jump into toxic maximalism. So not just being like, oh, well, Bitcoin's probably the best solution. And again, being a Bitcoin only approach, it's not. It's better than storing your value in dollars. It's not. You can win with that approach, but it's not the best approach. And if you only have $100 at the end of the month, you will not. That's not going to free you, because Bitcoin is not going to grow that radical growth period. But there are other assets that will, and so by educating and understanding the ways in which people can cooperate, actually compete in the open market, just like we're seeing with the SpaceX IPO and whatnot. And shout out to Strike Perpetuals going live with exposure to SpaceX already. I mean, that's so cool, dude. That's so cool. Shout out to them for sure. That's basically perpetuals contracts, unlike Hyperliquid and whatnot. It's basically offering something like a Hyperliquid, but it's UTXO based smart contracts. So again, you can get all the way into a strike situation, and man, it's powerful. It's powerful. And so yeah, I'm bullish on that. And I think things like the wallet interfaces and all that, the lending and borrowing, it's just going to get smoother and smoother and more streamlined, so that it makes that onboarding experience better. But yeah, like what these assets are, they're instruments of liberty, Bitcoin freedom, Litecoin liberty, all this kind of stuff, um, they really are a solution. They're the peaceful free market solution that remains. In my mind, it is the last peaceful free market solution that remains to the people of the United States. It's Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, these sovereign digital assets, sovereign digital assets, much like and there's less than five, I think. There's only a handful of them, but just like a currency has three things that define it. A sovereign digital asset is an asset that you can have capital expression at all points of all points of the planet. Nothing can stop you. There are no clawbacks. There is no da da da. So UTXO gets you there, right? So a sovereign digital asset is three things, right? Hard cap supply. You institute the gold condition. No one may own a printer, so that if you compete with a free market to acquire a set unit number of assets, no one can then disadvantage how well you've played the game by creating more units, right? If there's 21 million units and you acquire 1 million of them, and then someone comes along with a printer and makes 100 billion more, well, damn it. You know what I mean? The game can be, right, because now we want to occupy Nash equilibrium is what we're striving for. And ideally, we create scalable algorithmic Nash equilibrium, which is a sane model. And yeah. Man, so many of these eyeballs. Oh yeah, there's 21 million I was talking about. Freedom and liberty. Yeah. The test of time, passing on knowledge, having an impact, and a legacy that doesn't even necessarily require children. Not gonna say that I wouldn't have children, but I'll tell you, nah, like probably, because I refuse to become a father and not be able to honor that. That man, like, yeah, earlier in life it was a hard pass. It was one of those things where, I mean, it's just, yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, nah, and there was a little window where I was like, okay, I'm making enough money, like, and man, there was a man, where it's like, okay, if I met the right person and they were really special and they wanted to become a parent, if I loved them, I don't know that I would want to deprive them of the experience of it. But again, just when I look at it, like it's such a, it matters. It matters. Like you fuck up a whole universe. Each of us, each instance of sentience is a universe. When we lose another person out there living a life, bro, it's like a universe dies, you know? And each of our, at least for me, man, my individual experience, fundamentally, even though I do good in solitude, I'm an introvert in many ways, even though it's a lot there. Um, but those moments that I have treasured the most in my experience is really creating art with other people, like being deeply involved in loving what you're doing collaboratively with other people and whatnot. And just the cool moments you have with strangers that are free. And sound money and whatnot, like liberty and whatnot, is kind of one of those fundamental prerequisites to creating an environment where you meet people like that. You associate with your community and your company and your cohort and your whatever, right? Your fellow man. Um, and so yeah, so Bitcoin winning and Litecoin and all this various stack of technologies. I really do like I think Bitcoin and Litecoin for the average mom and pop, like average Joe, let's say they've never heard of any of these things ever before. Man, I mean, as just a 1 and 2, that's a really good place to start, right? You can say, okay, it's kind of, there's a silver and gold analogy that could be made, but let's store our money. Like you can start a conversation with those. And if people avail themselves of those options, if they start DCAing into Bitcoin or they start DCAing into Litecoin, they're going to they're going to at least keep over the course of time their capital. I mean, Litecoin right now is at a crazy discount at $42 and 50 something cents. But when you go back to the chart, $50 Litecoin, it's the same thing why I think Bitcoin under 69 is price suppression and shorting in many senses. And I think Litecoin below 50 is similar. So yeah, people that are stacking these, and Litecoin's got its next halving coming up in a year and a month, which is really cool. July, I think right now it's slated for July 2027. So the Litecoin is 4 times the supply of Bitcoin. How do you get there? It's got a 4 times as fast block issuance, so the block reward and all this kind of shit. So a new Litecoin block is created every 2.5 to 5 minutes, roughly. And right now the block reward is, I believe, 6.25 Litecoin. So that means, there's that much supply introduced every 2.5 to 5 minutes, right? Well, that's going to drop from 6.25 to 3.125 in July. That drop from 6.2, that Bitcoin, their block reward back in the day, it dropped from 6.25 down to 3.125 in April of 2024 on the Bitcoin side. So that's another interesting catalyst coming up for Litecoin. So when you start thinking about where are these assets going to be over the course of time, you've got these, Litecoin's flawless uptime. It's got privacy built in at the L1, like Bitcoin doesn't have that, so yeah, there's so much there. And I think if people enter the conversation and they get comfortable with, okay, this is what Bitcoin is, this is what Litecoin is, by looking at these, I'm going to start maybe looking at other assets in the market. I'm going to ask, okay, well, what is XRP, right? That's a valid question. Just like, what is Ethereum? What is Solana? All of these things, it's valid, and we need people to be able to understand, what are these things? What are the trade-offs? You know what I mean? Like if I'm looking to keep my money long-term forever, I don't really want to start that conversation with an infinite asset. It's like, oh no, but the protocol, it'll burn too sometimes. Right? There's something powerful about 21 million, 84 million, 45 billion. Those are the max supplies of Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Cardano, for instance. Zcash, 21 million. And so that that allows you to also do future modeling. No one knows how many Solana or Ethereum is going to be in 5 years, 10 years. We know exactly how many Bitcoin there's going to be, etc. So there's fundamental pieces of the modeling. But then you get something like a Monero. It's got an infinite supply. True. So I don't like that, but it's got privacy. It's got a very motivated community. It's got a UTXO basis, and its inflation rate does actually, it tracks. It's not limited like Bitcoin's is, but it will track pretty closely. It's engineered to track pretty closely Bitcoin's growth curve out to 2140, which will means, which asymptotically approaches the issuance of 21 million when you look at. But Monero will continue to go without the asymptote, It's allowed to to transcend 21 million. Um, so, but yeah, you get privacy, you get the UTXO basis. And so yeah, and I think if people choose Zcash for their privacy versus Monero versus say something like a Midnight, and then who knows what else. Like someone on the Cardano blockchain was like, oh, I'm going to incorporate zero knowledge, whatever. There's a guy that's doing potato pay. That's a whole thing. Starch, man, shout out to Starch. I like that project. It's cool. It's cool. It's open source engineering. I mean, like, dude, they're doing all kinds of stuff, like private messaging. Like, imagine being able to message your friends using blockchain technology, and like there's like Starch. I forget what he called it. But so yeah, people are innovating through these layers, and then shout out to something like Noster. That's notes and other stuff transmitted through relays, basically. It's a Twitter/X like platform that's for, unfortunately, there's toxic Bitcoin maximalists there. So a lot of people are leaving it, because it's probably a toxic cesspool. Like I mean, I don't go there, but it exists. And that there's some really interesting technology that is used in kind of the way that it's modeled, Noster as a communications network. And it's just interesting that people are now using those kinds of same things. They're using that, you know, similar models, but using blockchain technology to do it. So yeah, I mean, there's just so much of what this technology is. Also, the native monetization layer for artificial intelligence. If you're creating a bot and it's doing whatever it's doing, whether it's odds market participation, whether it's just arbitraging against market opportunity and traditional finance, the future is going to be, again, like Larry Fink's talking about, like tokenization and all this shit. Artificial intelligence is not going to be sitting here going, okay, I'll wait 3 to 5 business days for this. You know what I mean? For a traditional settlement in a whatever. Nah, not in the world of Bitcoin and Litecoin and Monero and Zcash. And that's the other thing. AI is not going to give an F about, I'm a toxic maximal. Get the out of here. Because again, provably it's a dumbass approach. It is not the most free to maximize. So there's that. Like if you're willing to have an honest conversation about human psychology, reality, and math, obviously it's R-worded AF to be a maximalist of anything, and it's doubly so to be toxic about it. Jesus would have brought, and there is a suspicious Venn diagram of overlap of folks that dare put Jesus's name in their mouth, and they're terrible gutter people like that, and that's sad, and that definitely exists in Bitcoin and unfortunately the crypto community. These folks, it's some of the most disgusting, abhorrent behavior is folks that call themselves Christians and act absolutely contrary. Hey, right? Look at the occupant of the executive office in the United States. I'll just say, show me the Jesus in this man, right? I'll leave it there. But as Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit, right? So yeah, don't be an asshole. There's no reason to be toxic. You know what I mean? And there's a lot that of to commend Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Most of the stuff that I do, I mean, that's where it started, it's important. It's important that it succeed. And it's not going to succeed with the current folks that are kind of driving the narratives and the quality of the conversation, because people aren't learning even what it is. To this day, we don't hear people talk about like what it is. Very few people have a clue what a UTXO is. But if you understand what that is, relative to like an accounts-based blockchain, like what an ETH and a Sol, like, cool, we got a ticker, we have a thing, we got it in a digital currency. It is based, though, engineering on an accounts-based model, which is a security, vulnerability, and we also talk about parallelism, concurrency, what it is, like gold or fucking uranium kind of thing, like, is different. And so, I mean, that is such a powerful argument, but these people would rather be like, oh, it's a shit coin and it's this, and they lean into hate, not having a conversation. How about we talk about it as an infinite supply? That's madness, right? And again, the accounts model. But yeah, so UTXO, that stands for unspent transaction output. Very, very powerful, and like to model that, it's like, imagine you want to buy a $5 cup of coffee. Let's say you have an address on the Bitcoin ledger, and associated with that address, a string of characters is some unspent transaction output with a $20 equivalent worth of Bitcoin. and this coffee merchant accepts Bitcoin, and he is $5 for this cup of coffee. The way that an unspent transaction output works is when you spend an unspent transaction output, you create new unspent transaction outputs. So what happens at the protocol level, the merchant says, hey, here's an address, right? Send me, $5 worth of Bitcoin, right? And so the $20 UTXO is spent and it creates two new UTXOs, a $5 value UTXO and a $15 value UTXO. The $5 UTXO goes to the wallet declared by the merchant that you, as the custodian of the keys, are allowed to initiate the spending of the UTXO, of the unspent output. And the 15, your change, you don't even have to think about. It literally just follows the mathematics of your wallet. And for folks, right, the not your keys, not your coins, 12 and 24 words in a particular order, all possible receive addresses that can be generated. So if you have a Bitcoin wallet, right, you can hit a button and generate an address to say, hey, send me Bitcoin, right? Just like you used to send me Litecoin. Well, when you're hitting that generate receive address, you can generate a theoretically, might as well be infinite. You can generate, right? But get this, all of those receive addresses possible are mathematical rhapsodies on 12 or 24 words in a particular order. And so if you custody those words in that order, you are the only entity that can regenerate, So basically, if you prove that you have the words, you can custody all of the addresses that can be created by them. It's very, very powerful. And so yeah, at the protocol level, when you're initiating these spends, the protocol says, okay, what's the minimum value UTXO that I can spend to satisfy this? And then there's things like UTXO management. Maybe you want to bundle a bunch of UTXOs. So you could have literally 100 $1 UTXOs, okay? And you could concurrently spend them at the same time and create $100 UTXO like in your wallet. That's like an example of like UTXO consolidation. If you don't want to have a bunch of different addresses with unspent transaction outputs, right? Let's say you're a business. Let's say you're a business and you're like, oh yeah, I'm an auto repair shop, and I take Bitcoin. I just tell I like Bitcoin. I know I immediately escape fiat inflation. And so I say, yeah, if you pay me in Bitcoin, I'll give you a 5% discount, right? So they know what their invoice is, right? And they, boom, if they decide to pay it, they get the 5% discount. I can verify it on chain and go bet, have a nice day. Here's your keys, And then at the end of the day, though, right, as I'm successful, I get all these UTXOs. So at the end of the month, I'll just send myself when I want to consolidate. Now, why would you do that? So it costs less transaction fees on the ledger. And again, engineers are going to do all kinds of stuff and they'll get more and more efficient. But yeah, so there's this UTXO consolidation, what it is. But now think about this. Now that you have a better sense of this model, do you understand when we talk about mathematical formalism and determinism? Determinism means like this leads to that, right? So it's like the principle of transmissibility in physics, or Pascal's principle in fluid mechanics, has to do with the way in which these like discrete instances, like UTXOs, can be modeled as these discrete things that occupy space, so to speak. They can be moved and modeled like physical systems. You can create smart contracts that operate with these principles of transmissibility by virtue of their discrete nature. With an accounts-based blockchain like an Ethereum or a Solana, it's just Billy's account is worth 1 million units. You can't go, hold on, unspent transaction outputs came into this account, okay? And you can UTXOs create more. You feel me? So it's just like when you're dealing with a UTXO-based blockchain, you build security, you build parallelism. Because now that's the other thing, right? When we talk about like failed transactions in an accounts-based blockchain, imagine you're getting ready for date night. You want to book reservations at a restaurant. You want to buy flowers, and you want to buy movie tickets or some shit, right? So basically, you're on your phone. You say, I want to buy this. I want to buy that. I want to buy the other. So now, cool. It's going out on the blockchain. Let's say your first transaction, you have $1,000 in your account. First transactions were the $100 for like a dress or whatever, the flowers, whatever. Second one is $50 reservation for the whatever, right? Well, what can happen is you've initiated these transactions. They're live. They're going out to the network. Well, what if your first transaction, when they both left, your account balance was 1,000 units? It was $1,000. Well, now, boom, your first transaction goes through, gets cleared by the merchant. Boom, your account is now updated. It went from 1,000 to 900. Well, now, the smart contract satisfied for the second merchant, but now it comes back and it goes, hold. The math that I had was $1,000. I'm looking at an account here of $900. Big fail. Something, right? So that's a parallelism and concurrency thing. Like, and if as you increase the amount of activity, the parallel and concurrent behavior that you want to orchestrate and articulate on the network, you run into this more and more. Whereas with a UTXO based blockchain, bro, like imagine them like $100 bills in your wallet, right? So in this theoretical situation, like you could have this one person sending out $300 UTXOs at once, right? And if the address is whatever it is, as long as it's less than $100, then right, whatever will go to the merchant, and then it'll follow the math back to the change to a UTXO address that I custody. You know what I mean? And so on and so forth. And so literally just the ways in which you can create smart contract behavior, the ways in which, it's also just the security of the system, the mathematical formalism and determinism. When you move those UTXOs, bro, you are locking stuff in time and record in a beautiful way. So that's the other thing. A publicly distributed ledger, right? So again, Solana's ledger is 600 terabytes already. Bitcoin's about 1 terabyte. So that's just right there. It's radically wrong. But now think about this. What is that ledger? What is a block? Literally, guys, what is in a Bitcoin block is literally just what are all of the receive addresses that exist in the network, and what are the values, what are the UTXOs associated therewith to each of those addresses. And then as people use the network and unspent transaction outputs are spent, thus yielding new unspent outputs that live at various addresses, the block records that. So that's why when people talk about, like, you can imagine it, like you got 100 people in the room, like what are the Bitcoin miners doing? So everyone, like a Bitcoin miner is saying, yeah, bro, I am literally going to, man, I often described it as in 2009, when Satoshi started the Bitcoin ledger, imagine you have an hourglass, and in the top is 21 million grains of sand. And one of the magical properties of each of the grains of sand is they can be divided by 100 million smaller units. Okay. Now the block reward was 50 Bitcoin every 10 to 15 minutes. So we can imagine the rate of sand falling from the upper, like the unmined Bitcoin, to the lower chamber, but it's an enclosed environment, right? Then nothing gets in, nothing gets out. So it's so beautiful. So the 21 million set, but now it becomes circulated in liquid. The Bitcoin mining network is, imagine you've got this group of people encircling the hourglass, watching the grains of sand, which are like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is divisible by 100 million units, right? And you're watching the division and flow of these grains of sand to these different addresses on the network. So the Bitcoin mining network is literally just watching, where is it flowing inside a enclosed system. People are generating receive addresses, people are spending unspent outputs, and these grains of sand are dividing and flowing. And all that the Bitcoin blocks are saying are, what are all the addresses that exist, and what are the associated UTXOs? And so the way that the Bitcoin mining, right, in order to win the right to the block reward, right, for I get to declare what the block is, and I'm going to boom write it to the network that we all agree on, right? Well, first, to make sure that whoever wins that right, you don't want a bad guy to do it, right? So how do you create a system where it's very unlikely that a bad guy gets to try to write what the balances are in this block, right? And what you do is you do a random math problem. Because, okay, then your magical bad guy, however good he is, has to beat, first of all, the math. The mathematics of the Bitcoin ledger, basically, the more people that are adding hashing rate that are trying to solve the random math problem, every 18 days or so, the difficulty of the math adjusts. If more people are trying to solve the math and win the block reward and solve the random math problem that's issued every 10 to 15 minutes, then the problems get harder and harder and harder. The more people that are participating. If people go, I'm done, and they drop out of the network, the math gets easier. So it's because the goal is to have one new page, one new block written every 10 to 15 minutes. And then if you do it, you get a native block reward. It was 50 Bitcoin. every 10 to 15 minutes. Now it's 3.125 Bitcoin or so, plus transaction fees. So there's transaction fees associated with the migration of UTXOs across the network. So that is what the Bitcoin mining network. So to avoid bad guys, one random math problem. Everyone trying to solve it all has to solve the same math problem. First one to solve it wins. Now, you don't win the reward yet. Second phase is you have to say, what are the addresses? What if we give this to you, what does your page say? What does your block say? What is the current assignment of UTXOs to every address that exists on the ledger? And what we're going to do is whatever you say, we are going to compare that to everyone else's page and or block that was also trying to solve the random math problem. So that if they had won, right, what would they have said? And if you're participating and you're like watching the divide and flow and the whole hourglass turns, we're watching the Bitcoin or the grains of sand, the 21 million grains fall from the upper chamber to the lower. And then once they're in the lower, we watch them divide and flow. Everyone else that was participating, if they were being honest actors, they're all watching the network as well, right? Everyone's page should say the same. Only a bad actor, right, is going to be, right? Because how do you win? How are you stealing the Bitcoin, right? Well, you got to declare an address and say there's UTXOs there, right? And that's the other bitch, right? Is one, you got to somehow have enough hash rate, which is very expensive now, to win the random math problem, to even have a chance. But then the second thing that's going to catch you is if your block disagrees with 51% of everyone else, we go invalid, run it again, and then it's back to random math problem. So think about that. So then if you go, okay, and you say a fraudulent thing, you say, oh, I would put this address and it's going to have all the, 500,000 Bitcoin in it, right? Well, everyone else is going to go, that's not what mine says. And then other guys going, not mine says, I don't know, right? And we go, you failed, bro. And maybe something happened on your end, that's cool, but you don't get the block. So that's powerful, bro. So when you have the random math that's one hot potatoing who's going to win it, but it also gets harder and harder and harder the more people that are participating, and it's so beautiful, and then when you look at game theory, think about it, right? Anyone else in the network, if they let a bad guy get away with a bunch of Bitcoin, right, it hurts them in their pocketbook. That's that game theoretical, how you want to create a state. That's when there's like money for your enemies situation and that's Nash equilibrium. Oh, it's beautiful. Nash equilibrium among many things, but I think one of the most succinct articulations that can be unpacked to intimate the power of what Nash equilibrium is, it is a state in which all players playing a game are maximally advantaged, commensurate with their skill and available moveset, right? So if everyone's playing chess, right, everyone's playing the same game, right? So there's a certain number of moves that can happen depending on the state of play, and some people are really good. You got Magnus Carlsen and you got someone that's not Magnus Carlsen, But if 100 players are occupying a state of Nash equilibrium, they will basically rank themselves. They will find their own rank because probabilistically, right? Nash equilibrium supposes that you are succeeding in the game commensurate with your skill level and your available moveset. And by the nature of chess, it resets, right? So over the broad, so it's beautiful. So in economic, if we get a state of Nash equilibrium in economic contexts, we have people competing economically and they are truly succeeding commensurate with their skill and the moves that they have available to them. And so that's where education about all of these blockchains, that's how we actually maximally advantage. But so on the security side, someone that's participating in the ledger, right, it's going to hurt them if they allow a bad actor in the network to get away with it. So that's also where the distribution, a sovereign digital asset, to prevent that needs to have sufficient decentralization and distribution. And those are two different words because here's right. So Amazon, right, operating large data centers all around the world is not decentralized. It's distributed. It could be in, America, Texas and UK and Singapore and Australia, but you got the same guy declaring, do this, right? So you need decentralization as well. The people that are choosing to make decisions, as well as where is the hardware located, that has to be sufficiently decentralized because they are the validator set, and then the UTXO gives you the mathematical formulas of determinism, and then the hard cap supply gives you the gold condition. And there Shout out Bitcoin. You've got what can create a sovereign digital asset, an asset that can be expressed anywhere in the world. Because you can't stop yeah. And so there's very few assets that fulfill all of those criteria. Bitcoin and Litecoin are two of them. I mean, I would argue that there's a couple others, but there's many that could get there. Not actually. There's not many. I think when you look at it, sovereign digital assets. Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. You know, but there's definitely going to be a handful of primary players that qualify to that level. Because again, something like a Solana and Ethereum are disbar. They can't, because one, they don't have hard cap supplies and they're not UTXO based. So already you break, all those paradigms. But yeah, and so it's like, again, the quality of the conversation of what Bitcoin is, to help people actually understand, like, what am I doing when I'm interacting with this? That is a way to make people feel more comfortable about saying, okay, well, now I kind of understand what I'm doing. I understand what these words are. I understand when I generate an address, what am I doing? I understand that unspent transaction outputs create new outputs. So if I buy $100 worth of Bitcoin and I buy a $5 item, I can spend that $100 UTXO. It'll create a $5 UTXO and a $95 UTXO. The 5 goes to the merchant or whoever I'm paying, peer to peer, and the 95 follows the math of the protocol back to an address that I custody. They can only be created with my keys. And then when you start realizing, oh my gosh, I can use Bitcoin UTXOs in smart contracts. I can collateralize. I can borrow against this Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Maybe I want to put in $500,000 worth of Bitcoin to borrow $100,000 worth in a stable coin. You know what I mean? And then suddenly you've got yield potentials using things like the Bitcoin UTXOs, the Zcash UTXOs, the Monero. Again, for like Cardano, I think Cardano's best use case, I mean, to me, the long term, it's the home of good hope, or is how I would market it, brand it, whatever. It's the grand unified UTXO theory, which is really that's chain. It's just everywhere. That's just an acknowledgement that the maximal freedom inducing solution that maintains security and just all the shit is that interoperability of UTXO based blockchains. We know if you stay in Bitcoin, you have encumbrances with Strategy, BlackRock, all the shit. So if you can migrate, if you can get out of the Bitcoin when it's at a high spot and migrate to an asset that also allows you to hold your whatever, but you're escaping when Saylor and the suits correct it. You open up these avenues of maximal success. I mean, economically speaking, retaining capital, creating capital. Like, for instance, likelihood of Bitcoin doing a 10x in the next 18 months. 10x? No. Yeah, 2x? Yeah. I expect Bitcoin to likely book a 10x within the next 18 months. I think that it is not unlikely that we can't be maybe charging towards a new all-time high before the end of this year. When you look at what does peace in the Middle East look like, when you look at what does international oil trade, Bitcoin preferred look like, when you look at post-Clarity Act, what does that look like? Remember, the spot price is just the last executed buy or sell order. And we've got aggressive whales. One of the reasons why you can't be why Bitcoin only is ridiculous is we're seeing the impact of Wall Street suits dominating the price. You know what I mean? So but what that also means is that shit can't flip like a bitch when they want to. We can get that shit cooking well over 100K. The only reason that it's at 63 or right now, they're artificially suppressing it. That's one of the reasons why this little butte, this little step function we had, because it was just like a little bit ago, like a little bit before the stream started. We're at 2 hours, by the way. Again, shout out to everyone that's rolling through. Shout out to Mad Maverick. Shout out to Wolfenden. Shout out to AB 8948 and whatnot. But yeah, just Bitcoin was chilling at 62,338 and then popped up to like 63. So basically added about $1,000. And that is what it looks like when you have like a major entrant. Like that is what it would look like on a chart if a market a bid hits the open market. That's hey, Asian whales, Habibi bid, you never know who that could be. Some kind of treasury company out there. BlackRock, doing whatever. Uh, um, but yeah, it's interesting, man. It's very, very, very interesting. But yeah, I think Bitcoin could easily be back over $100,000 before the end of the year. But I think within 18 months, absolutely, I expect it to. Because look, the next halving is already is in 2028. You know what I mean? And we're already damn near halfway through the year. You know, the Litecoin's halving is coming up in just about a year, July next year. And then, and so yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked at when the Bitcoin halving, but the last one was April 2024. Next one will be, let's throw it 4 years, April 2028 ish. You know what I mean? So, and that's coming up on around 18 ish months. You know what I mean? But anyway, um, yeah. So the reason why I bring that up is, so Bitcoin though, is it going to do a 5x? No. In the next 18 months, probably not. Are some of these assets? Could Litecoin? Yeah, Litecoin could, and when you extend it to something like a Cardano, or you look at like even an XRP or an Ethereum or a Solana, assets that I wouldn't particularly hold, but is there a potential for a higher multiple on the return? And if someone is maximizing the potential in the opportunities that the market presents, someone that is well versed in booking those multiples in the XRP layer, the ADA layer, the Night layer, the Litecoin layer, wherever you're at, but knows to, hey, when I want to keep it, I will migrate some of it back to the Bitcoin layer when the markets present a great discount, like right now. You know what I mean? But I mean, really, there's so many different ways, to right now to declare how someone should be navigating the market as it exists devoid of context, because it's different depending on where you are. If you're just entering the markets, man, DCA, understand like some of the fundamentals. You're going to want some exposure to Bitcoin, going to want some exposure to Litecoin, in my view. And then you're going to want to learn, and then maybe you find that, hey, look, there's a compelling value proposition for an XRP play. For my money, XRP is the CBDC that they may or may not ever declare, right? When blockchain technology was like obvious, like, oh shit, this is going to work, the folks behind XRP basically went to the banks and they're like, look, this is the future of international settlements. So do you want to get your lunch eaten, or do you want to get into bed with us? And so the banks said, bet. So that's XRP, right? So, but if we're trying to decouple power from the banks, right? Right. But I'm also, if we're being rational with the markets, are banks going to go away overnight? Not likely. So what does that also mean? Probably means that the pony that they're picking is going to have some modicum of success. And now we're talking like fucking adults that are actually trying to, advance the state of play, and not being like toxic maximalists that live like have fantasy arguments in a fantasy land. It's just it's such a waste of time. But yeah. 211. Shout out to it. Yeah, man. What's up? Yeah, shout out to Wolfenden. Yeah, and shout out to, again, everyone that's been rolling through the stream. So yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm probably gonna go out to the 3 hour mark today. Yeah, kind of on the macro there. So how do I see Bitcoin? So pivoting to some of that, I was in a space the other night. You got folks out there that are trying to say, oh, Bitcoin's going to go down to 40 something. And, oh, if you give me, man, I heard someone, man, just say a silly number. It was a silly number. And to their credit, they were talking about being silly, and what I really, really thought was very cogent is this gentleman was saying that he learns more about the reaction of these players and these just certain folks with his even forwarding the notion that, hey, what if this happened, da 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 da. And again, that's like that toxicity, right? Apply the Jesus standard, and you should kind of know, you'll know them by the fruit. So if someone's getting out there being a belligerent asshole because someone just asks a question, is having a conversation, you learn a lot. You know what I mean? And no, Bitcoin's not going to 19,000. That's ridiculous, bro. But which is why he said it, but he's probably looking at like, because if we're being honest, like he was saying all kinds of shit. But I think a piece of him might be trying to get fear and spook folks. There are people trying to do that are trying to get people pushed out of bags, that are trying, if they can shake it loose, they want to shake it loose. And the dude was kind of owning that. He's like, fine, if you're going to paint me with that brush, well, fine, But at the end of the day, he was open. He was having a space, Shout out to Gary Cardone. Fuck it. Um, but uh, but yeah, man. Like apparently people are giving him a hard time, and again, everyone's got a lot to him. But I appreciate what he's doing. He's got a lot going. He's doing a lot with it. But yeah, it's not going to 19,000. It's not likely to go to the 40,000s. I think we're seeing very, very close to where the actual floor is. I think that they've suits have really tried to push this market down a couple times. And big players, and there are at the BlackRock and MicroStrategy level, are willing to lean on the shit. You know what I mean? But even when they lean on the shit, it only goes so long. And then here's the other thing. There is only 21 million. And if your long game is, we want to get it all, but we're going to be assholes and we're going to push this price down to shake out whatever coins, what you cannot control is, especially like I often call it the Habibi bit. There are folks out there with bags and they are waiting in the cut. That are like, okay, you know what I mean? And here's the thing. If you're a Fink or you're a sailor or you're a whatever, and you think you're going to get clever and be like, okay, I'm just going to throw these 100,000 Bitcoin on the market really quick to fuck around and find out, and I'm going to get it back, and then Habibi comes in and just goes, yunk, and goes, no, you didn't. So that is the other thing that happens is even when you have institutional collusion and coordination, as the markets get more and more savvy to the state of the dollar, they realize we need exposure to something else. The international markets, like it's really wild. And so again, we know America has to advantage Bitcoin because it's the only asset that allows them to maintain dominance. So that's another thing that we know is coming post clarity. We haven't heard a lot about the strategic Bitcoin reserve lately, but it's coming. But yeah, man. So as far as Bitcoin goes, guys, I think we're seeing institutional manipulation and bullshit, and shout out to Darkside. He was in one of those rooms the other day. He hit the nail on the head. The recipe to enforce honesty on the markets is self custody, right? So understand, your custody options and all this. But yeah, man, with Clarity Act coming, and I think the other thing is we have major liquidity events happening with the SpaceX IPO, Anthropic IPO. But consider the average holder, the average person that's gaining exposure to those assets is also far more likely to be conversant in blockchain technologies, particularly on the AI side, because blockchain is the native monetization layer. So while there is this, substantial liquidity events that are going to be happening with AI and SpaceX and whatnot, to see that value flow, especially once, we hit that irrational exuberant peak and some deep in the green money is looking at, okay, where am I going to flow this to lock some of this capital in? That's where we're also going to see, I think, again, in a world where we have citizens united, we should not have citizens united. Public servants should be public servants. Politicians, especially in America, should not, and anywhere really, should not be able to get, advantages in the market. Because think about this. That's why Clarity Act isn't passed right now, guys. Because they're going to make their money on SpaceX. They're going to make their money on Anthropic. And then what are they going to do? They're going to pass Clarity Act. And they're going to dump in your head, and they're going to move it into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's going to go over to 100K, and you're all going to go, oh, and then Santa's coming to town. Just don't tell them, that I told you, but shit. You know what I mean? And so that's the thing, is that kind of, I think that is really more or less what we're seeing on the macro right now, is advantage partners know these are major liquidity events. Larry Fink even said there's about a handful of industries. So when the market is introducing times where you can move with size to get multiples, so they're going to get those multiples. And then how do you make sure that your discount where you want to put that money is good? Right? You just go, hold up on that Clarity Act, give it another week or two. And then, and right now the markets are just at a discount, so these suits and, my friend Martha Pelosi, no relation to Nancy or Martha Stewart. But yeah, you know what I mean? So I'm not going to be the one sitting here thinking that this cook isn't in, because Bitcoin is far too compelling of a value proposition, and the United States of America needs it. The nature of the bid is going to change, and I think what's being underpriced, as well, is the bellwether effect. that the United States represents. When we get Clarity Act passed, again, we're seeing BlackRock moving forward with filing for paperwork to start offering yield products based on Bitcoin. So yeah, I would expect there to be a renaissance at some point. And again, whether it is before the end of the year, I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm not the one that is not is going to think that that's not a possible outcome. I think that there could definitely be one or two major events. The way that I model it right now, because again, there's too many known unknowns. But something that I think we can, there's a high probability of, a confidence interval here of greater than 90% that between now and 2029, there will be a major liquidity event into the blockchain environment. And then after that, hearing Larry Fink characterize 1929 in the context, or 2029 in the context of 1929, we have to expect that we need to be prepared to weather a serious macro winter, a serious pullback, an institutional level unwinding. And the ponies that are being picked to ameliorate and or forestall or prevent, but it's the piper is paid. But that is going to be growth. That's going to be SpaceX. That's going to be Anthropic. It's going to be these things. And the tail of this unfolding, again, I'm listening to what Larry is cooking. He's the largest institutional asset manager in the world, And so reading that tea, it seems to me that between now and 2029, we need to educate a sufficient proportion of the population that they understand that they can custody these assets and they can make these assets productive. Okay. Back in the day, people used to say, how much do I need to retire? And I go, okay, look, every $100,000 that you have can generate about $1,000 a month. So if you tell me, hey, my expenses are $5,000 a month, I can pay my mortgage, can pay my right? I say, okay, great. You need 500 grand. More or less, you're going to be able to generate $1,000 for every 100 grand. So you know what I mean? So then double that. And now you can start talking about retiring. Because that means your portfolio could take a 50% haircut, and you'd still be able to pretty reliably pay your bills. That's kind of the back of the envelope math. In blockchain contexts, we have far more aggressive growth paradigms right now, particularly where we are in the adoption curve of the technology. So you can generate a heck of a lot more return faster, for less at where we're at in the market. But that thinking of we need to create capital that is productive. And I think it is imperative for these technologies to succeed to be freedom networks, freedom recipes, assets that allow us to push back on centralized actors and entities around the world. I think it's crazy what they're doing to the people of UK for like people will do an X post about just expressing their fucking speech. Like, bro, I don't know what's going on, like with like violence in the streets from like say people from other countries, but apparently like you can say some shit and not like violent rhetoric, but like you can just say shit and they will like be knocking on your door. Like it's crazy what's going on in the UK. And in America, Palantir, dude, Palantir is infringing on everyone's third and fourth amendment right, every US citizen. And they're in everyone's devices. It's crazy, dude. The matrix is real and it's been live for a while. But yeah, there's a matrix of media and money. It's controlled by centralized entities and actors that are, when I say the matrix is live, it's particularly a matrix of media. It's that there no longer exists any primary platforms of communication, like whatever, whether it's your local news or a cable news system or something like an X or a YouTube even, right? There are no primary modes of distribution of information whose chief concern is apprising you of what constitutes reality, of telling you the truth about what's happening. It is bought and paid for. There's sponsorship, there's slant, there's lean. And in a world in which there are no primary avenues where there is a true and earnest, that's why you've got to information from multiple sources, and you've got to understand that state of play, and so yeah, the ways in which to push back on the matrix of media and money and whatnot is these freedom tools and these freedom networks and freedom assets. And so we need enough people that understand how to custody these assets because they can be productive. and they can help folks weather the winter on the other side of 2029, however long it lasts, you know. Um, and I would say, yeah, minimally, I don't even want to. I don't. When you look at the Great Depression, that was bad. That was a damn near a decade of badness, um, you know, and it really didn't start, pulling out, yeah, till like World War II, 1941, for America, December 7th. Shit, yeah, crazy, bro. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, this what cryptocurrency and blockchain is. I think it's so fundamentally different than what the average retail person thinks. I think the average retail person thinks, oh, Solana and a meme coin, and oh, fuck it. You know what I mean? I lost everything. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And then, oh, my wallet got drained. Yeah. It's not the best. It's not the best. That's why I don't really mess with it. You know what I mean? But there's people that do. And I'm not going to be the one that, if our goal is to empower people, they should, then the game is, if you've got someone that's very successful on Solana and they have an interest in keeping that money, it would behoove them to learn about things like Bitcoin and Litecoin, that no one can take that. It's fundamentally, also, it's got a hard cap supply. It's got the UTXO basis, all this shit, so that's the way, that we win, is we make sure that the XRP holders understand, yeah, that's the banker's blockchain. Just saying, it's the XR, it's the CBDC that they made, that they'll never claim, but it is what it is, But that's also, incidentally, why I am pretty confident that that XRP is going to participate in the global economy over the course of the next 10 years, at least. You know what I mean? Like, any kind of modeling anything beyond 10 years in this era is madness, because we're already falling across a technological event horizon together with AI and blockchain and all this, where the rate of change makes it so that you can't rationally model. If you are forecasting a model that's beyond like 10 years, and even 10 years is now, it's pretty wild. Just because, yeah, the state of play is going to be so different. Like in that time, that using this modern paradigm prior to those exponential changes and whatnot, it's not rational. It's, but within that domain, we certainly can. And so it's like, I think 2029 is a great little, it's a great financial chess game to be looking at. When you look at what is the current state of all the shit going on in America, the state of the global economy, you're looking at oil, you're looking at, gosh, man, everything from the, AI rollout, the SpaceX, quantum computation, the synergies in value creation. When you look at, those industries working together, there's a lot that can be achieved. But man, there's not enough winners, and that's another thing that Larry Fink was pointing out, is we need more medium and small size winners. Yeah, so yeah, education is a big thing. And yeah, Bitcoin's coming. Again, shout out, yesterday I was touching on the concept of crypto hope houses and hope hubs, and then hope villages potentially. As in part, I mean, I think it's good for just kind of anyone, but I think in particular for an alternative to the college model. For a lot of people right now, the choice has been, for a lot of places, it's like college or the military kind of thing. And when you look at the state of the cost benefit sort of analysis of a college degree these days, if you're not trying to be a doctor, or you want to contribute to a field, you're like, no, I want to get a doctorate, like I'm going all the way, then all right, but for most people, working really hard for someone else, living in close quarters, going $50,000 in debt that you can't declare bankruptcy on, to get a piece of paper and enter a questionable ass job market. Say you start now, you know what I mean, and you enter, in the year 2030 to 2032. You know what I mean? My God, because the average 4-year degree is actually completed in 5 years. And if you start at community college, I think it's like 6, and even then, only like, oh, it's crazy, dude. Only like 20 something percent of folks that started at community college actually successfully transfer to a 4+ year universities. And so this is a whole situation. So when you look at like the education proposition today, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but for a lot of people. And so what do? They just throw their hands up and go, oh, I'm proper fucked, and so now I'm going to crash out and do a public act of violence? No, right? So what do they need? They need an alternative model. What is that? A crypto hope house. What is hope? It's an acronym. It's like an Underground Railroad term. It's how oppressed people escape. Okay. And so imagine the new model would be you got 4 to 6 college age kids, right? Just finishing up their high school, figuring, oh, where are we going to go to college? And they say, hey, what if 4 or 6 of us got together? We found a state where we like the local laws or whatever. Maybe you like their greenery laws, or you like this or the other. But the point is, you got to have an affordable house, right? Say it's a 3 to 4 bedroom house, something that can fit these 4 to 6 young people. That what are they going to do? They're going to go for 4 years. We're going to replicate kind of like the college thing, but instead of going to college, what if, because for one, small business loan, $50,000, you can write that off in a worst case scenario. So what if instead of going $50,000 in educational debt for college, you get 4 to 6 young people, maybe some of them take out small business loans, $50,000, whatever, and they get into a house, right? Now you could have them just rent, right? There's so many ways that you can cooperate and do this model. But I think one of the really, really cool ones is like, imagine, dude, you take out a small business loan. One, you've got a home office. So now this house that you all, the game is how much equity can we establish in 4 years? Because if you think about that, you get one kid, right? Graduates, they're $50,000 in debt. They have a college degree though, and the job market, whatever that looks like in 2030 or 2032-ish, versus the other one at the end of 4 years, they own a quarter of a house or a sixth of a house that's paid off, maybe. You know what I mean? So now they've got a down payment. They've got 4 years of experience. Because then what are they doing in this crypto hope house? Here's what you're doing, right? You get 4 to 6 young friends. You find a house that you can get into where you can either rent. Ideally, you try to own it, and you split their schedules into 20 hours each. 20 hours, you work at a local business. You work at the local coffee shop. You work at the local pizza shop. You work at the local gas station, the local auto mechanic, some small business, okay? And you're a young 18, 19, 20-year-old something, right? And your job is to teach the boomers that are likely to be running these businesses about blockchain and cryptocurrency and the people that are rolling through there, okay? And then the other half, the other 20 hours, you're innovating, you're participating, you're creating in AI and blockchain. And then furthermore, you're creating content telling the story of, hey, yo, we're the Portland Six coming to you live from Portland, Maine, right? Or hey, yo, we're the Austin Five, we're these five, da da da. And suddenly you're creating right? People just with their TikToks and their Instagrams and their YouTube, all their shit could literally pay for those houses that they're creating together. And then suddenly they are holding their job at the local diner, not because they actually need the paycheck, but because TikTok loves it. They love to see Luke and Brian and their girlfriend fucking Susan at, working the local shift, and they're cutting the TikTok. Oh, da da da. We're on break. You know what I mean? And they're like, yeah, And then think about it. When you're only working 18 to 20 hours, you're not crashing out. It doesn't take your soul, right? And and this is the model. Because then think about it. Then these 4 to 6 young people are advocates for the technology, for blockchain, creating a better sense. And these small businesses, layering onto this, there's the Melenizzi Mayors Project. Imagine getting a bunch of 40 and 30 somethings to run for local mayor on a platform of just bringing hope back to the hometown. And again, it's the same acronym as crypto hope houses. It's how oppressed people escape. We bring hope back to the hometown by teaching. So these mayors would run on a platform of teaching small businesses how they can integrate Bitcoin and these sovereign digital assets into their balance sheet. So now a small business, that local pizza shop that's been, in Indiana, that's only made 140 grand, most like in their best year, but now they're locking 20% of that into Bitcoin. And so next year, right? So 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, suddenly this little pizza shop has a Bitcoin treasury. And now they're actually able to grow. And so all these small businesses actually participating in better money, which all these small businesses doing that is enriching the network globally. Right. And so then anyway, so young people are working at small businesses, which is also great. So then small businesses actually have people that are working, because that's a whole thing, you know what I mean, right now. And so, yeah, that to me is an encouraging and an inspiring and a valid model that young people can consider. What does it look like to band together with 4 to 6 year friends? Because that's the thing, man. A lot of these young people, if they're looking, it's like, hey, look, I don't want to go to the military. I don't want to get blown up by someone, whatever. And college doesn't make financial sense. What do I do? You know what I mean? And they're like, yeah. And you can't put a roof over your head for like, you got to work 60, 70 hours a week just to pay rent, and you go, well, okay, that may be, when you're by yourself, but right, with 4 to 6 friends, because you're not alone. There's so many young people that are like, this doesn't make sense. That's actually a huge problem. That's why, again, also why people aren't having babies and whatnot. Like, we're all seeing that it's breaking, and it's really scary for those young folks that are having to make a choice like faces most people at that 18-year-old kind of situation, where, yeah, and so I love the fact that there is a solution. There is an alternative to college and the military that can enrich. Again, it's the exponentiation of value creation. It helps it helps the adoption of the Bitcoin, Litecoin, all these different assets, right? It gives young people a way to establish equity, right? Because, bro, here's the other thing. I've joked before about like the Bitcoin baddies that bought the block and the Litecoin ladies that lit the lane. Could you imagine? Again, there's one content creator that made more money than LeBron James. Okay, last year, Sophie Rain. Could you imagine a house where a bunch of young ladies, because all they need is an internet connection and a camera and whatnot, right? So could you imagine some entrepreneurial young people? And again, 4 to 6 young college age friends, one of those girlfriends. I'm not going to say that they're not going to be maybe creating content. Again, it's between them, consenting adults doing consenting adult shit. But what I'm telling you is there are a lot of ways in which 4 to 6 young people could probably own that house at the end of 4 years. And I'll tell you, if I was deciding, okay, you're right. Like, could you imagine, rather than being the student that's $50,000 in debt with a college degree, but then, who knows what job market, or, bro, you have a home base, you own a house with your friends. And if you want to cash out, you have equity, you have a starting point. Now you by yourself can go and boom. And so then what happens when this group of friends goes, bet, no, we're going to own this house. And then why stop there? There's 4 to 6 of us. Let's get to owning houses together. We bought one house. When we work together, we make more money. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, is they divided and conquered us. Our hours don't go far enough. You know what I mean? But when you get 4 to 6 young people working together with a unified plan, with an objective, shit, it's hope. It's how oppressed people escape. Oppressed by broken money. Oppressed by terrible politicians. Like, man, Elizabeth Warren upsets me. I'm sorry. Like, I pick on her because she's the chief antagonist to crypto. Because not only is she not good for it, she's always talking all kinds of mess. And it's like, girl, I agree with you on a lot. I agree with you on a lot. Like healthcare. Like, last I heard, she believed that healthcare people should generally have. Healthcare shouldn't be some privilege to a few. Whereas right now, medical debt is the number 1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States of America. That's crazy. That's crazy. We can do better, But not only is she not is Elizabeth Warren not being able to deliver on the stuff, she's not stopping blatant like evil and bad from happening, and she's the chief antagonist towards what perchance is the only solution that the people have to be able to start owning houses again and to have hope, And she's out there making herself the chief, and it's crazy work, So stop doing that, Elizabeth. But yeah, man. So I think crypto hope houses and hope hubs are a powerful model, because you could imagine you get these 4 to 6 young people, boom, 4 years, maybe they own a house, maybe they just have substantial equity. They have 100 grand plus. Cool. Split that 4 ways, 25 grand each, split it 6, whatever that is, kind of thing, good on them. And then, they're in a spot to begin, building something from there. But yeah, dude, if you actually add them, and that 4 to 6 is successful at helping maybe integrate into the local pizza shop, the local diner, the local bakery. Now they accept, they understand. And now when you go to point of sale, there's a QR code. Yeah, it's Miss Betsy's Bagels. Welcome to Miss Betsy's Bagels. You want to pay? You can just, scan this QR code. Boom. Pay Betsy's Bagels. You actually get a 5% discount every day. Saturday, it's Satoshi Saturdays. You get 10% off if you pay in Bitcoin. You know what I mean? These kinds of things. And think about it. That small business in one move gets a superior asset and escapes fiat inflation. They now get an asset they can collateralize, they can do all kinds of freedom shit. It works globally. It doesn't have the inflation of the dollar. There's so many, right? And these are the kinds of conversations that the young folks that are working at these places would be having, you know? And then again, then the other 20 hours of the day, they're working and they're creating there. And then eventually, one of them's going to take it. And again, if they're really successful, ideally, even their marketing, telling the story of being these intrepid young folks getting on the property ladder, creating a new model, an alternative to the college model, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in so many ways, you know? You increase adoption and education of cryptocurrency assets. You empower a bunch of young folks. You help the property market. You get people actually being able to afford houses. You get them making better financial decisions for themselves. Yeah. And people aren't dating anymore and shit. Or having families. So this also helps maybe create environments where young folks can just be in a situation where it's more like the college experience, but that they're not saddled with the debt and they're actually creating something that lasts. So yeah, I am encouraged by that potential. And yeah, as far as the macro on the Bitcoin side, yeah, I think right now the 63,000 level is largely institutional suppression. And I think we're going to have major liquidity events with SpaceX, with Anthropic. Then we're going to see Clarity Act pass. Now again, Clarity Act can pass at any time because right now the suits have a hell of an opportunity, a buying opportunity. But I wouldn't be surprised, if these folks aren't looking to maybe book some of that liquidity from the SpaceX IPO, maybe the OpenAI Anthropic IPO, whichever one's and then that starts rolling back into Bitcoin, and I think it just begins rolling in with even more earnest once the Clarity Act is passed. And I think a lot of the suppression stops then, because then the goal is going to be, hey, let's get the number back up again, for all kinds of different reasons. But yeah, and so yeah, I think what I will do is it's 2 hour and 40 minute mark. I think I'll call it. There. Again, shout out to Mad Maverick. He gave me an idea when he shouted out Peppercoin. Is what I think I might do is for the first hour I'll try to have, like, I think it was Wolf Odin that had mentioned about like getting like a list, like of if the intention is to create content every day, to have like just a list of maybe some interesting topics to cover or whatnot. If there isn't some interesting pressing new item of the day, again, I'm kind of inclined to ramble. I think a lot of the way, ideally it's an entertaining kind of flow of thought and conversation. That is the goal. So I'm good with kind of having a free flow. And again, as I've said, my ambition is for this to be not just like blockchain and crypto. It's just that blockchain and crypto, you sound money, right? When people say Bitcoin fixes this, it's really just a commentary that our money touches everything, whatever you're doing, whether you're feeding yourself, and especially when you look at lobbying in politics, man. But yeah, from war and peace and love and business, our money matters, and so and freedom matters. And so to me, freedom and liberty are the conversation that is relevant daily, particularly in these times. Because I would say, man, you consult the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence has, I believe, 27 enumerated grievances against a king. And of those 27, man, the present apparatus, the powers that be, are guilty of the vast majority of the grievances against the king in the Declaration of Independence. So conversations about freedom and liberty and better money and decoupling our money from, and creating environments where we actually can have hope. We can believe in a future. We can believe that something to build for. And we can rally power. We can empower our brothers and our sisters and our neighbors, and we can create a network of people that are unstoppable. We can fight against the matrix. We can fight against the corruption. I mean, it's sad, dude. Like in America, bro, we are going to war for other countries. We are going into debt for other countries. Apparently, we're even paying for health for other nations. And again, I'm all about that Buddha Jesus energy, bro. I believe in empathy, in loving our neighbor. I want everyone to have health care, but I want every American to have health care. First, first. If we can do it, if we can help Israel have health care, great. Like, hey, right? But until we're all right here, and what I do not think is ever okay is to be murdering people, committing genocides, bro. Genocides, bro. It's wrong, bro. And I know there's even the people of Israel, and this is another important thing. The people of a nation are not the leaders of a nation, right? The people of America are so much cooler than Congress and the president. The average American is not a piece of shit, right? And I think the same get Russia, right? I always remember shout out to like Ukraine, like peace on the people of the world, be it Iran, Ukraine, Palestine, Israel. I don't give a fuck. We need to be not murdering each other. Um, but I remember the first images out of Russia when we heard that Putin was going to express aggressions and move across the border. The Russian people gathered in large numbers because they knew if it's only a couple, you get black bagged and gone, right? But when they show up in numbers, because they knew that it was important. And what were they saying is this is not us. This is not our will. We do not want this war. And unfortunately, Putin, right? The centralized power, the corruption, he still got his way, but we can't hold all of the people of Russia accountable for a corrupt leader at the top, you know? And so I think we have to recognize that is largely the human condition around the world, you know? Which isn't to say all leadership sucks everywhere, you know what I mean? But it's not perfect anywhere. And whether it's good or it's bad, we cannot say that all of the members of a particular nation are that. You know what I mean? And I say that because there's a lot of like anti-Semitic bullshit, bro. Like when you have someone like a Kanye West, someone that's like a cultural figure like that is out here repping things that are from hateful pieces of our history, bro, that is not good, you know? But then at the same time, when you have the leader of that of Israel committing genocide, that is not a good look for anyone. That endangers people. That endangers people all around the world, and especially in the nature of this conflict. And it's wrong. It's wrong. And there's like man, there is such a human it's like it's like a tragic symmetry that people who have so recently, thinking about it in history, experienced a Holocaust. What happened to people of Jewish descent in the 1940s? The fact that a nation that is the descendants of people that were the victims of a genocide, that fate would conspire to empower a leader who would make himself guilty of that kind of act. When you look at what's happened, the leveling of like cities, bro. They call it total war or absolute war, where you're not just firing at soldiers. No, man, woman, and child, we will wipe it off the map. That is the way in which the leadership in Israel has pursued families, people, men, women, and children. And then we got all this crazy stuff kicking off with Iran, and we're trying to negotiate peace. And then they start throwing bombs at like Lebanon. And then US citizens are going to be asked to pay to hurt our own currency, every small business, everyone that holds value in a dollar, man, not to mention just the national security of what it means to levy mortal consequence against other, human beings. It's crazy, bro. It's crazy. So all of which is to say that the people are not the leaders of nations, and so like, you know, I wish peace upon the people of Israel, like I wish peace upon the people of Iran and Palestine and Lebanon and America and Brazil and China, everywhere, dude. Everywhere. I personally think nations are ridiculous. Again, fingers and toes. We got a bunch of human beings and they're born all around the world and they got different laws. It was just people, people being born and then writing shit down saying this is how we do it here, because where our dirt ends, because someone lost a fight once upon a time. Like it is wild. Like what creates borders, Really, often it's just that's where we lost a fight once upon a time, And then sometimes there's just a great natural barrier like an ocean. Sometimes a river will do it, but no, usually it's a fight, like from back in history, Especially when you look at like Europe with all its, man. Um, but yeah, man, 2 hours 49 into the stream. Cheers, guys. I think I'm gonna land the plane there. Yeah, man, markets are cooking here on June 11th. Do not necessarily count on anything. I would say like hearing a peace resolution of some kind in Iran would put more of an underline under any of these prices, and then Clarity Act, are two other ones. For me to be able to feel like we're getting like a reversal, I'd really want to, I need to see a peace in Iran situation, need to see Clarity Act, otherwise we're just going to get, juggling uncertainties and whatnot. I do think though, as a fundamental valuation, I think we are. This has been a couple of because look, if you pop out, if you're looking at the Bitcoin chart, I'm looking on at Coin Market Cap. I'll even like maybe mention where the cusp is. So the level that I'd be looking at, we got a 64 that was hit on 2/23/2026. But look, there is a cusp. There's a little Batman ear right before a piece of gnarliness of growth. So what people are doing is they're inverting a number. Trying to find where it is here because I'm on the all-time chart. Yeah, it was around similarly February. It's around February 19th. There was a 50 an impulse up to around 51,000. But so there's around and then shortly thereafter 805 53 9. So there's a valley. So you see the cusp and then you see that valley. So yeah, guys, when you hear like 45, bruh, like the 53, 54, and that's good luck. Good luck trying to hold that. So, and I think that people, at 63, they're trying to shake out old coins, but for my money, I really don't see us going, too much. Again, I just said the numbers, that I think if I was modeling like oh no, like full whatever, around that 50K mark, I think we're pretty good there. But again, even right now at 63, I think below 69 is pretty crazy to me. I think true value of Bitcoin that's actually people want and is more or less on books, on paper, is between 69,000 and 72, 73,000. There are people that want Bitcoin that are willing to risk their ability to get that position to acquire, to get a $63,000 spot price, because the goal is to spook it. They're hoping that there's still enough free, whatever. But their obligations are overhead. Closer to that again, 69 for the culture. But yeah. So I would say, between where we are now, 60, the 60-ish level feels like that's about where it is before you start getting international bids that they can't control, and so that's bullish. And then yeah, and so yeah, so we'll see. I think Clarity Act is on its way. I think it's, I've heard whispers that there's a will to get it inked by July 4th. That seems pretty rational. I think, we've got the SpaceX IPO here any day now, kind of thing, and um, yeah, and so yeah, don't get shook, don't get took, keep educating yourself. Don't be a maximalist. That's stupid. Definitely have some exposure to Bitcoin. Definitely have some exposure to, assets and whatnot. That makes sense. Again, Bitcoin and Litecoin to me make a lot of sense. I think calculating a Bitcoin normalized unit, if you want a goal of like as a baseline of exposure, I would say calculate how much it costs to own the equivalent of, like, if you wanted to own, who wouldn't want to be able to have one Bitcoin, right? I mean, I'd love to have a Bitcoin, right? Um, and so calculate how much in US dollar terms is required for you to own the equivalent of like one Bitcoin worth of that network. And not dollar wise, but I mean proportion of the network. So 121 millionth, right? So for Litecoin, that's 4. So take 4, multiply it by the spot price. It's less than $200. You look at something like Cardano, that's 45 billion divided by 21 million, you get 2,143. It's 2,142.8, but round it up. So you multiply that by 16 cents, 17 cents, you get about $365, So it's things like that. If people start empowering themselves and they go, okay, then they have a rational way to maintain exposure in assets that make sense, things that are UTXO based, hard cap supply, these kinds of things. And if it's something like a Monero with an infinite supply, calculate a synthetic or a dynamic BNU, where you divide it by its current circulating supply because it doesn't have a supply limit. And then you start to have a capital allocation and an exposure strategy that allows you to basically ride the rising tide and book some superior multiples potentially than might be realized in Bitcoin. Because again, just the magnitude of the flow has to be so. I mean, right? Solana's up 6.45% on the 24 relative to 3.11 on Bitcoin, and look, Cardano is up 6.5%. But right now, it's because those valuations are so low. It does not have to move a lot to get a serious return. Because again, almost 6.5% in a single day, and it's still less than even 17 cents. And so Cardano, man, it's somewhere. And imagine, once Bitcoin, we get a peace announcement in Iran, we get Clarity Act, bro, markets will send. And so yeah, being able to book those multiples and where, flow them down, because I often like to think about them over like Bitcoin is like long money. Bitcoin and Litecoin, I think that both qualify as longer money, and things like meme coins and whatnot are speculative. You use a much smaller proportion of your portfolio that you gain exposure to. I think anyone that's really like modeling like an adult kind of portfolio, you don't really want to probably be having more than 10% of your exposure to something like a meme, but understand that, again, Bitcoin's not going to do a 5x, I mean, maybe there's a 5x in the next 18 to 24 months. Is it impossible that could happen? No, that's not impossible, but not very likely. Whereas, are there memes that are going to do? Yes, there's memes today that are probably going to do a 5x. Are you probably following best practices if you put yourself in a position to find that whatever? Probably not. But the important thing is to understand that there are memes that are going to have successful. There are people that are going to participate in those memes. And if you understand that you can book those superior multiples, you want that person to not just be trapped in the meme environment. You want them to know, hey, there's something about Bitcoin. But if that meme person is meeting that Bitcoin person that's choosing to be some hostile, toxic, whatever, you're not going to teach that meme idiot who's about to make up a lot of money and then lose it again, because that's typically what happens, because they don't know how to keep it. And one of the ways to keep it is, look, if you've got a meme coin and you put in $1,000 or $100 and it turns into 10 grand or 50 grand or something, bro, right? Maybe take 10 or 25% of that crazy come up, maybe even half, and move that over into something like a Bitcoin or something like a Litecoin that has institutional participation. Odds of Michael Saylor and Larry Fink pumping your meme coin bag, not very likely, but they are interested in Bitcoin. We see people moving into Litecoin. We see these people that are filing for spot ETFs for some of these other assets. So it's understanding that there's a there's a broader strategy that can be employed to allow folks to participate in some of the higher multiples, in some of the higher risk assets, But understand the long game is, right? How can we roll some of that longer money to the Bitcoin layer? And what's powerful is as we roll some of those more meme style or these higher risk reward paradigm assets, as we roll those profits into the Bitcoin layer, we enrich that as well. You know what I mean? So we make Bitcoin also more honest, especially if we're acquiring, because now we're competing for sailors' dollars, right? Or sailors' Bitcoin. We're using the power of memes and the ability to cultivate a new holder base. Because think about that as well. From a network adoption and distribution profile point of view, you want the meme holders to be learning about the Bitcoin layer because that's going to ultimately make the Bitcoin layer more successful. So it's like, again, like these toxic folks they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're not making friends. They're making people go, ugh, And then we got Solana out here making everyone think it's all bullshit and Fugazi, So, yeah, we got to have better quality conversations. And as I say that, we're at the 3-hour mark. So with that, guys, I'm going to employ the pumpkin principle. Shout out to you. Shout out to Wolfoden. Shout out to Mad Maverick. Shout out to AB. Shout out to everyone that rolled through the room. Shout out to the couple folks that are watching now. It's a pleasure, man. So we're day like 3 or 4. I'm going to commit to at least 40 days, 40 nights. I want this to be forever, but I just thought to myself, because I was waking up this morning, exploring a bunch of shit, doing a lot of cool stuff with Stream Elements. I'm looking forward to getting it going and whatnot. But maybe tomorrow will be the first one that I do some stuff, and we'll be looking at charts and stuff. But yeah, until tomorrow, guys, take care. Stack your sats, and yeah, just make of yourself a light, as they say, and love thy neighbor.